We're going to get started in just a minute. Come on now. We're gonna hear, guys. We're gonna hear more about this tagging deal, and I'm gonna try to keep the public comment down to a minimum.
Sold out to an oil company, made a lot of money.
They gonna turn this cold beer today?
I don't think so.
That's good. I said, what's the deal with the red and the blue part here?
I'll do it.
Well, I don't know what's going in it.
It's my drug license. My boss has to sign it.
Right here?
Yeah.
This is your what?
It's drug license.
Good
Okay.
morning,
Might as well.
Okay.
Yeah, are you just now getting here? Oh, okay.
Okay. You wanna do it again on the public comment?
Right on the line.
Okay.
He thinks it's just
Remind me.
a guy with just
Okay.
a cover. Really?
Good morning. I try to always start on time. It seems like I'm about 5 minutes late this morning. I would like to welcome everybody to the 385th Commission meeting. Hope everybody had a Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year, a prosperous New Year, and got to spend time with your family members, because that's what's most important. And let's look forward to a good 2013, working together as an industry and an agency trying to promote a good, healthy, safe product. With that, I would ask for approval of the minutes of the 384th meeting.
Chairman, I move that we approve the minutes of the 384th Commission meeting held on September 18th, 2012.
Second. Been moved and seconded. Do we approve the minutes of the 384th meeting? Is there any discussion? Not all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. And now we'll go to item 3, the report of the Executive Director, Dr. Ellis. Good morning, Dr. Ellis. And if everybody would just check their cell phones also, make sure they're on silent. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, and yes, welcome. Proud to be here today and happy to give you my report as Executive Director of the Animal Health Commission. In your booklet is a summary of the items I'm going to talk about, and then behind it are some attachments that are relevant at certain times. I'll reference to you there. Start with just an agency overview as to what's going on, and obviously right now, every other year the legislative session meets from January to the end of May, and that's what started up last week, and so it's got our full attention, and obviously the most pressing item is at the first of these sessions is usually budgetary. We've already received notice of our Senate budget hearing date for February 6th. The House committees have not all been selected yet, and so we're waiting to hear on the House, but within the next 6 weeks we will be asked to come before both the Senate and the House Appropriations and Finance folks and discuss our agency budget. The budget that we turned in last August was basically at the direction of the Legislative Budget Board, which told us to turn in 2 options of a budget. One was a flat line $6.2 million in general revenue, which is what we got last session, and the other was to reflect a 10% reduction, which we turned in, and they asked us, tell us what you're going to do if we cut your budget 10%. I don't think that's obviously is going to happen at this point. As y'all have seen, the comptroller has come out with some pretty good estimates of funds for the state. Primarily, economy's turned around, the oil pumping is helping, and so we don't anticipate a reduction in our agency budget. So we're looking at a flat line plus anything else that happens along the way good that could happen to us, whether it be through our exceptional items or through an increase in appropriations at the discretion of elected officials, to be quite honest. So I had a meeting, as some of y'all know, I had a meeting last week in Representative Hildebrand's office with representatives from the LBB and also Speaker Strauss and Representative Pitts, who's the head of House Appropriations. And the discussion was about the possibility of appropriating extra funds back to the agency. You know, as we lost over $4 million in general revenue last session, and the direction to the agency was, if you want it back, figure out how to get it in fees. As y'all know, we were able to raise a little bit of fee money. We're probably looking at $200,000 to $300,000 a year in fees, primarily from health certificates and from the Deere folks on some inspections for inventory status verification. But other than that, it was y'all's call, and no fees were derived beyond that. And so we moved forward with the budget we've had. You know, I said at the time we needed $3 million in fees, general revenue, to adequately staff the agency and do the minimum requirements of the agency, and really nothing's changed. We know the fee issue is dead for the moment, so we're still stating that if it's appropriate, we need $2 million more in general revenue to rebuild this agency back to what I believe should be about 150 employees. We're at 125 right now. We were just under 200 2 years ago at this time. And, you know, I've said it before, we understand and embrace smaller government. We embrace cuts and lean, efficient government, but we're too far the other way, and I don't have the people I need to even cover vacations and just do some basic things for the day, let alone respond to a widespread disaster that could happen for a variety of reasons. So we were optimistic and appreciative of the dialogue we had with those folks. I want to thank Commissioner Winters for helping set that up. He's a constituent of Representative Hildebrand's, and appreciate helping set that up. They listened to us. What they decide will be up to those guys. But we are working closely with the LBB, and the LBB staff has asked us to provide them information about where the $2 million would go in our strategies. The agency is funded by strategies, which are not the same as programs. It's kind of complicated. I'm not even sure I understand it, but basically the LBB has asked for our money figures. We've given it to them. And so now the process is just underway to see what happens. Our next steps will be to go before the House and the Senate committees and talk about our budget. With that said, there's also, and I sent you guys all an email, I've also shared it with the stakeholders, and have already begun dialogue. In fact, met last night with Texas Veterinary Medical Association Legislative Council to discuss a statutory need specific to veterinarians, or pretty specific to veterinarians. You see here that you know, it's not appropriate for us to say anything other than we see a deficiency in our statute that we're asking for help and clarification or support to do our jobs. We've identified 6 things that at this session we're hoping would be considered, that the stakeholders would agree and help us remedy some weaknesses in our law. And y'all's rules are based on law. If we don't have law, you can't pass a rule. It's just that simple. And so as you see here before us, there's 6 bullet points that we're looking for clarification on and help. One, first one is related to veterinarians. It's called Texas Approved Personnel. And right now we have what's called brucellosis approved personnel status for veterinarians. It basically says if you're going to do brucellosis work in the state of Texas as a veterinarian, you have to take a little course from agree to follow the rules, to sum it up. The problem with that is that that statute's old, based in the 1980s, and at the time this was a brucellosis predominantly focused agency, and that's not the case anymore. We have TB programs, deer programs. We have equine pyroplasmosis that now requires veterinarians to do certain things with test charts and identification. We have a trichomoniasis program where veterinarians are required to do certain things to participate. And chronic waste and diseases coming in as far in the collection of brains and specimens for the diagnostic work in the deer industry are also now on the table. So basically, I have a statute that only approves the Animal Health Commission to regulate veterinarians working in our programs for brucellosis, and we have at least five other programs now where, you know, we have rules basically, or guidelines for vets, but there's no statutory authority really behind it. And so we're asking to expand our brucellosis approved authority to Texas approved authority for veterinarians and lay persons involved in that, not just vets, because there are some other situations where lay people could be involved. Working with TVMA on that, I think that they're going to support the initiative, and they're going to do a little more talking about it today. But I'm fairly confident that they're going to support the concept that the Animal Health Commission needs its authority broadened beyond brucellosis to work with veterinarians. Health certificates, for example, just writing health certificates. We're kind of weak there if a veterinarian violates those rules. About all the authority I have now is turn it over to Dr. Varner and his folks at USDA, or pass it on to a licensing board for a hearing. And usually our violations are not worthy of board action, and the USDA, we're at their mercy whether they choose to participate or not. And there are certain disease programs that are not federal programs. The TRIC program, for example, they're not interested in that. That's not a federal program. Equine programs in general, they have some statutory weakness themselves because they don't consider horses to be livestock. And so we just, in certain situations, we have very little recourse against veterinarians. And so we're working through this with the TVMA folks as our key stakeholder. Their concerns were about, fairness and equity, and I think they feel very comfortable with 2 veterinarians on the commission and a rulemaking process that's transparent and open, that if the authority is given the agency, it'll do the right thing in promulgating rules that are fair and equitable and are not punitive to veterinarians in any way. And so I'll be glad to answer any questions on that. Doc, you're looking at me kind of funny there, but
No, that's all right.
anyway, I think we're on track. Second one is just a fairly simple one on ECVI authority. Basically, we sell health certificates in all our statutes based on paper, and we know now that electronic health certificates are going to become more and more common. And be honest, I believe there will be no more. At some point, there will be no more paper health certificates. Maybe within as little as 5 years, there'll be a thing. Our statute is silent on that, and basically, we're just asking for a couple of sentences that authorize the agency to regulate and manage electronic forms of health certificates is all that says. The next was fever tick language, and basically what we're asking is to update the terminology that says dipping right now to treatment, to be honest, with that ivermectin, Dectomax, different things, and also including the definition of treatment that preventative measures are under our authority, because we're in the process of working with our numerous stakeholders to develop a vaccine. That's not a treatment. Vaccine's a preventative measure, so we're trying to expand our terminology there, and also ensure when it comes to some of the wildlife issues, especially with deer and adjacent pastures and low-fenced areas, that the agency has the authority to regulate the feeding of treated corn and other products like that to help kill ticks. We can do that with deer on the infested premise, but if it's low fence, we can't do anything with them right across the fence. And so it's a long chapter. If you look through the email I sent you, there's probably 40 pages, but it's basically, for the most part, 40 pages just changing the word dipping to treatment for the most part. The very first page of that fever tick chapter has the 2 definitions we're trying to get changed. Class C misdemeanor, there's a number of programs in which, again, it's kind of like our brucellosis approved personnel issue. There's a number of programs where we have no authority other than administrative penalty to interact with noncompliance. I can give you a whole list of them, but the bottom line is we're asking we have the authority for brucellosis, we have the authority for TB, and you get beyond those 2 programs and the agency's ability to act and use compliance is very limited. In administrative penalty process is basically a trial kind of a process that's very time consuming, and truthfully we just don't have the staff to have a trial every day or every week or whatever. Class C misdemeanor would just say that if someone violates our rule, we can go to the JP court and work with them and try and get the folks to comply, whether it's a $50 fine or whatever. There's no jail time involved. It's just like a fine of some sort, or a warning if it's appropriate. The 5th statutory thing is this very simple issue that the poultry industry's had for a number of years, and I don't know why the agency hadn't cleaned this up before, but basically we have no authority to depopulate or indemnify poultry that are affected by certain diseases. We can quarantine them, but we can't do anything else with them as an agency. Even if we have the money, we have no authority to pay someone for sick chickens. And we have a couple of situations now, small backyard flocks, that have some diseases that the large poultry, commercial poultry guys would like them to get rid of those chickens, and they don't want to because they're their pets, and so those birds are just in their backyard. And so this would actually give the agency authority. Basically right now our agency authority says we can depopulate livestock for diseases, and we would just change it to livestock and poultry, and the same for indemnification. So it's just, again, it's a fairly simple change, but it's been a deficiency for years and years and years. I think Dr. Hillman just didn't like to do this. He never wanted to open up our statutes, and so he just didn't. And I don't know if I'm smart or dumb, but I'm just trying to fix some of the problems that we're doing here. So, and the last one's on chronic wasting disease surveillance, and this doesn't really have anything to do with the rule that you're going to have proposed later today, per se, because the agency works on voluntary compliance. But some of the voluntary compliance measures that are going to be proposed in the rule that you evaluate later on for red deer and elk related to mortalities, a percentage of mortalities, and the lack of ability to do a good inventory system on elk and red deer because they're just out in the pasture and some folks don't even know how many they've got or where they're at or how to catch them. This would strengthen our ability, if the agency so desires later on, to utilize hunter surveillance or other methods of surveillance that would require authority by the agency to promulgate those rules. So we're going to propose a rule to you today for consideration on elk, red deer, which is based upon voluntary compliance and the goodwill of the folks enrolled. But if there are some bad apples, there's not a whole lot we can do about some of this down the road. And so the statutory authority would give the agency the ability to do something about it later. But we don't want you to take that into consideration in the rule that's proposed because it's a good start, I believe. A couple of other internal things. We just finished another round of evaluations and had two second interviews for candidates for the Assistant Executive Director for Animal Health Programs job, Dr. Hensley's old job. At the end of the day, we determined that neither candidate was right, and so we are not. That job remains open, and it's not what I want to do. I really need to fill that position for my own sanity, I think, as much as anything. But we're gonna bring through another round. I brought all the regional managers through once a week each in the fall. I'm gonna do another rotation where those guys come in a week at a time, just do projects, do whatever we tell them to do, go to a meeting, get on a conference call, just things that we don't have time to do. And we'll repost that position this summer and try again for a qualified applicant. There's a number of reasons why we're not getting good applicants. One is the salary. Two is it's a really hard job. You throw emergency management and animal health programs for the state of Texas and managing over 100 folks. It's going to take a special person that wants to do that, and then veterinarians as a group are usually not as interested in management as they are being vets, and so you have to have a vet that likes management. And so it is what it is. So we're going to remain right now. It's Dr. Swartz and myself and Dr. Hughes Garza will be the only vets in this office, and we're going to do the best we can and bring in field folks. And finally, in regard to the agency overview, I do want to introduce Mary Ludiker. She's a staff attorney. She's a governmental liaison. She comes to us from the Texas Department of Agriculture. She has a strong background in animal health issues. Her dad's a large animal practitioner, and her husband's dad's a large animal practitioner. So she knows all about veterinarians, probably more than we want her to know. She knows we're just regular old guys and kind of dumb sometimes, but there's no aura there because she's from a vet family. But we want to welcome her, and she's already hit the road running, and we're glad to have her. When the session's not underway, she's going to help Gene with rulemaking and rewriting our rules, and I think you're going to see the effect of that at the next commission meeting, whenever that ends. We're going to have a number of rules we bring to you for consideration that have just been on the back burner, and we haven't had time to do it because they're very time-consuming to prepare rule proposals. So welcome, Mary, and we look forward to working with you for many, many years.
Welcome, Mary, too, on behalf of all the commissioners.
I'll move next into an update on the Texas disease traceability process that's underway, and y'all are all familiar with it. And passed at the last meeting was two meetings ago, actually, in June, and then in September we had a meeting. You know, the change of ownership requirement for permanent identification was destined to start on January 1st, and I was asked to work with stakeholders and staff to get the message out and make sure everyone understood it so that a January 1 transition date would be as seamless as possible. And I think for the most part we've been successful there. Over the last 6 months, we've distributed over 1 million ear tags for free through our employees, through county agents, the extension folks, through practicing veterinarians who've partnered with us, through USDA veterinary service folks. We set up an online system where the tags that are handed out can be entered seamlessly into our database, or we'll take a piece of paper. We've got ear tag shipments going to the county agents order them from us, the veterinarians still get them from USDA, and we're assisting the sale barns that choose to tag. We're getting them their tags, and so they don't have to deal with any bureaucracy through USDA as far as tags. So we've handed out over 1 million tags. I've done countless numbers of press releases, written, public speaking engagements, and I'm sure there's still people that don't say they don't get it or they don't understand, but that's our challenge, working with Bonnie and our public information staff to continue to to get the message out. As to the details of that, I've had very few calls from producers, to be quite honest with you. And most of them that I have had interactions with are, they're like, well, you need traceability to do your job. I do want to mention briefly the situation with sale barns in the state of Texas, and we have 95 sale barns, I believe 95 or 96 sale barns working right now. We have 60 in full compliance with our rule as far as assisting their clients with ear tagging and helping us ensure that cattle that are sold have permanent official identification. We have 35 markets that are not in compliance with the rule as of today. I can't speak for why they're not in compliance. I would assume, though, that at some point there's some of them here today to listen to you guys and see what's going to happen at today's commission meeting. There's no rule on the agenda. There's no action to be taken, so I'll yield to the chairman as to what direction he wants to say. We have one market that's in full non-compliance. They're not tagging anything. The other 34 of them are tagging cattle going through the chute for palpations and testing. For the most part, I do not believe they're making any assessment of the quality of the cattle being untagged. They're not slaughter cattle. They're just cattle that didn't get directed to the chute to be palpated. But then there is one market that is not tagging anything, and we'll work with that market first. It's our intention. We wanted to make sure that over the last 2 or 3 weeks there wasn't any misunderstanding, so I directed my staff to go back to the markets, make sure they understood the rules, make sure they understood how we could help them. And I spent the month of December working with my staff to make sure there was no conflicts. I didn't want there to be any drama the first week in January. I think we've been successful in that. We've been a little over a year now without tagging cattle, so it wasn't going to be a crisis if the first week there were some misunderstandings. But I can tell you at this point, I don't think there's any misunderstandings at this point with cattle going through sale barns. The markets are either compliant or they're not compliant. And so we'll begin to work next, with those folks. You can look at it two ways. The guy selling the cow is in violation, and that's going to be our primary role first, is to make sure that the folks selling cattle without official permanent identification understand the rule. And so we'll be using letters of information. I wouldn't even call them a warning letter. If an animal is sold without an ear tag starting later this week or next week when we get to it, those folks will receive a letter just saying this is a reminder that you in Texas are supposed to have permanent official identification when your animals are sold, and you sold an animal that was not in compliance. If you have some questions, we'd be glad to work with you. Otherwise, please comply. So we'll work through progressive discipline. That's our first step. We believe that'll be very successful at the onset to get most folks in compliance. And we'll begin to work with markets ownership on a one-on-one basis as well. So
I'd like to make a comment, if I could, Dr. Ellis, and I hope I speak for the entire commission. I've been involved with this commission for many years, a lot more years than I've been chairman. And our process of rulemaking has always been has always dealt with talking to our stakeholders and working with industry, and not every rule our industries have been happy with. We have, in my opinion, strongly supported the belief of our state veterinarian that traceability in the state of Texas, the biggest cattle producing state in the country, is very important and is something that we take very seriously. And I appreciate the fact that Dr. Ellis is allowing more time, more education. I hope that soon, in the next few weeks, we'll have full compliance. If not, Dr. Ellis and I will sit down and discuss what our next move is. This is never, in my years of being involved with this commission, this has never been an issue that we've ever dealt with, blatant non-compliance, and I hope that we won't come to that. If any other commissioners have anything to say, I'd appreciate, but I, as chairman, am supporting Dr. Ellis, and we hope that this transition to this rule goes smoothly, and I'll leave it at that. Go ahead.
I'll follow up with just a brief remark or two on the federal animal disease traceability concept that's out there. That they've been under rulemaking consideration for probably 4 years now, maybe 5. I can't remember. I know Dr. Hillman was still here when I went to Denver to a meeting a couple of years before he retired, and I'm on my 4th year now, starting my 4th year at the commission as executive director. So who knows where they're going or what they're going to do. They did come out with a proposed final rule in December that would be effective. Well, it's been pushed back to effective in March. I think the one issue that you're going to hear today that concerns some of the cattle industry is about the change of heart that the USDA folks had about allowing slaughter cattle to move on a back tag only, direct to slaughter. And that's their prerogative. The federal rule is a minimum rule. They'll tell you straight up, this is a minimal rule. That's all it is for interstate movement. It's interstate movement only. They did not completely open the door for back tags because they said if a cow's not going to be slaughtered within 3 days of movement, it has to have a permanent official identification. We know at times all of the major slaughter plants feed cattle. There's no way to figure that out. They don't even know, they're reacting to market conditions, weather conditions, orders that they have. And so I anticipate, and Dr. Varner may have some remarks when he comes up on the USDA perspective. We have some problems right now with slaughter plants receiving out-of-state cattle without identification. When they get killed, they become a Texas cow because they were killed in Texas. And we have more major slaughter plants than any other state. We will begin to look at the situation at these feeding operations for slaughter cattle. And the rule directs that if cattle enter a slaughter facility, a feeding facility without identification, they need to be tagged. So we're going to begin to interact with the slaughter plants a little more than we have in the past. But I think the intent of the Texas rule was to give my staff and the agency the ability to quickly trace diseases now. And back tags are okay, ear tags are okay. You put them together, you have a better chance of having traceability, and that was the intent of the rule. That was what y'all considered, in having 2 forms of identification gives me a better chance to interact on your behalf to help the industry, and that, it is what it is. So I just want to make sure that the concerns about the federal rule are not binding to us in any way. That's just some minimal standards, I don't have nothing else to say on that other than that's not going to solve the problem of cattle being fed at slaughter plants. It's not. They still have to have identification, and I would anticipate that slaughter plants would like to buy cattle with tags and might give a premium to that, so they don't have to tag them if they get their untagged and they decide to feed them. So you may want to take that into consideration as well. I'll move on to the next part of my presentation. You can see here it says public information, and throughout your book behind my report there's examples of press releases, Facebook, Twitter, all the things that Bonnie and Lisa do for us on behalf of the agency. It's in there if you want to look at it. Related to public information, one other activity I'm involved with from the swine perspective is I'm involved in a national working group working on a messaging for large shows and exhibitions for this new virus, the H3N2 variant virus. I'm one of 3 state veterinarians on that working group, trying to come up with a process and messaging when sick hogs show up at a stock show, and also provide guidance to state vets on what to do with those sick hogs. And we actually had this happen to us in November. Allegedly, we had some sick hogs go to a belt buckle show, that a prospect show and sale, and so we had to perform what would amount to a foreign animal disease investigation. There's some illegal entry involved, and as it turned out, the hogs weren't sick. This is an important process to me personally as a veterinarian and to the nation, in that we have emerging diseases. This is another example of emerging disease in the swine industry. 2 years ago it was H1N1 virus, now it's the H3N2 variant. And there's a meeting tomorrow in Indianapolis that I was asked to attend on that, and I'm not going to go because I'm going to go to the ICA meeting instead. I want to stay and deal with Texas folks. But this is an important public information thing, Commissioner Real. We're trying to work out some messaging, so the Houston Stock Show, the San Antonio Stock Show, Star of Texas, whatever, if we have a situation with sick hogs, we'll have some guidelines in advance what to do. I anticipate our staff working more closely in the future with stock shows. This is an area where I want us to get more involved, not only with hogs. We saw the same issue now a couple of years in a row with the HB1 in the horse industry. And so as we move through this year, I'm going to work with our staff, our veterinary staff, to ensure that we get to know the managers of events and their veterinarians, and try and work together on some protocols in advance for reactions to diseases in the swine industry and the horse industry are two that are in dire need of help assimilating what to do when we have something bad happen in a congregation. So I'm proud to be a part of that and look forward to that. And finally, we have a couple of exhibits planned in the next few months. One of the TSCRA folks at their annual meeting in March in Fort Worth, and also a Texas Emergency Management Conference coming up in San Antonio. We'll have a booth there, and that's part of our public information efforts. Move on to trichomoniasis. You know, I'm not sure when y'all are going to have your next meeting, but we may have a working group before that next meeting. We'll just see how it goes, whether you decide to meet before the session's over or not. If we don't have a, you know, if it looks like y'all are not going to meet late May or early June, we may push this TRIC working group meeting up into April so that we can, and any decisions for rulemaking, we can get it on the agenda quicker. We'll just see how that works out. But we do already have a couple of requests for rule considerations. There's also consideration of a new type of transport media that veterinarians would use to take the samples, and they come in little tubes instead of pouches, and we're trying to evaluate and work with Texas Veterinary Medical Diagnostic Lab to decide if that's a good idea or not for veterinarians. And so that's what's going on with TRIC, and Dr. Schwartz will have you some more information on the disease itself. Paraplasmosis, you guys passed a rule at the last commission meeting authorizing the designation of at-risk areas, and I think everyone was thinking about CWD, but we told y'all at the time there were some other diseases that we would use this for, and pyroplasmosis is one of them. And so what we intend to do is, most likely, I've asked my epi staff to give me a formal recommendation based upon the preliminary data, but it looks like we're going to probably need to do an area test in Kleberg County, basically test all the horses in Kleberg County. This is Kingsville. We've already tested, obviously, as you know, the King Ranch and some other trace outs, but there's a number of horses there that just the epidemiological connections to large ranches and just the movement of horses around from trail rides and ropings and events and who worked where. We don't have a handle on pyro. We finished up a Kennedy County test, tested about 200 horses there and found 17 positive pyro horses in Kennedy County, and these are mainly ranch horses. There's not really even a big town there. That's what Sarita is the biggest
400 people
town,
in the whole
400
county.
people. But Kleberg obviously will be a little more logistically complex, but I think you can anticipate hopefully for the next meeting, we'll have finished this. I've asked our folks down there to utilize the instant command system, set up a response, and we'll work through messaging. We may have to have a town meeting, anticipate maybe having some certain dates where we'll be at a certain place and just test horses for free. If you want to bring them in on a Saturday or whatever, we'll work with the practicing veterinarians down there, but we don't have a handle on pyroplasmosis, and Kleberg County is the next county we're going to go to. There's probably, truthfully, 3 or 4 counties down there we're going to need to do this to, but with our staff limitations, I only have one vet south of San Antonio, and the federal vet that's supposed to be there, so that position's vacant. So I have one employee south of San Antonio veterinary-wise right now. We did lay off our field vet last year, so we're going to have to work through this, and we're taking our time, but we will be doing a pyro test in Kleberg County. And I think one good news for pyro in general is the law enforcement action that took place about 3 months ago now, where they made a number of arrests in Texas related to pyroplasmosis affected horses being part of a drug cartel money laundering scheme in the horse industry. May help us with the number of new cases we get. I think they arrested about 23 people in the state of Texas, many of which were involved with horses, and that's the indirect reaction. The result was diseases, and we also had equine infectious anemia that we believe is involved in some of these Mexican connections. So that may help us bring down the number in the future, but it's not going to solve the problem, and we're going to have to remain vigilant about border security related to animal health issues in the state of Texas for the near future. Moving on to brucellosis. I think the biggest issue right there is the transition by USDA, primarily driven by fiscal cliff issues, in my opinion. Money seems to be driving some of their decisions. Also a result to a certain degree of the success of the brucellosis program nationally. Texas is still considered high risk until next month by USDA. But basically what USDA is trying to do is figure out a transition to a statistical sampling scheme for brucellosis testing at slaughter that will, 1, maintain trade, and 2, quickly identify new cases, because we have a nidus of infection at Yellowstone. Right now in the Yellowstone states, about Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, there's 7 infected herds that have been disclosed in the last year, a couple of them outside the risk area that they've designated near the park. I don't think they have a handle on it. I think if you talk to those folks, there's some things going on in the elk, climatic changes or just changes in their migrations, that where one of these herds was 30 to 40 miles outside the known elk area, and it was elk related. And so what you have is a population of cattle in those 3 states that is possibly exposed to brucellosis over and over and over again. As I said, 7 infected herds in the last year in those 3 states. We went back and looked. We received over 10,000 breeding cattle from Wyoming alone last year. And we feel that with the stoppage of first point testing and the reduction of slaughter testing, if we don't do something, we may be at risk of accidentally allowing brucellosis infected cattle back in the state and really not knowing about it until some veterinarian somewhere runs an abortion screen, which could take years. You know, we had a call right before Christmas. Dr. Schwartz and I are involved with a guy that wanted to bring in about 100 breeding heifers from Wyoming, wanted to know what we're going to do, what we're going to make them do. Well, technically, Wyoming's a free state for brucellosis. And this is a reflection of some of the problems with the USDA's apparent transition out of eradication programs and more into assisting with marketability and other things they want to do, and leaving this up to the states to figure this out. And so I anticipate probably bringing to you a proposal to consider a post-entry test for breeding animals coming out of either those 3 states or parts of those 3 states. The problem is those states don't have any identification system in place to identify animals living in the risk area for Yellowstone. In other words, I can't tell a difference in a heifer that is 300 miles from Yellowstone in Montana and one that was right there in the park. There's no difference. They don't have it in there. And so from our perspective, should we allow heifers to come in here that could be latently infected and 2 or 3 years from now go to aborting? My opinion is no. We're going to take a look at a USDA risk assessment that was just done. And that, I know already in reading it, peripherally reading it, that latent heifer, I think they're trying to recreate history up there. Some of those folks are saying latent heifers are really not going to be a problem. We shouldn't worry about it. They're also letting animals move on 1 negative test, even though they may have been exposed to an aborted fetus the day before. They're letting them move out on 1 negative test. They're letting heifers move out on 1 negative test, and the tests aren't even really relevant until after they've calved. And so we anticipate bringing you probably a post-entry rule, probably the harder version, which would just say breeding cattle from all 3 states need a post-entry test like we do for Mexico. And then we'll let those states' cattle industries tell us why we should back it off to the GYA only, or the risk area, because if you can't tell the difference, if they come out of the risk area, go to a congregation point, get 1 test and move freely, which they're allowed to do right now, we can't tell the difference. And so we'll ask y'all to consider that probably at the next meeting. I'm very concerned about brucellosis in Yellowstone. It's not going away. The environmental folks are winning the debates versus agriculture on a regular basis up there, and so you're going to see a relaxation more than a more stringent addressing of this disease. And Texas now, with no surveillance system in place at our markets and a weakened slaughter surveillance, we won't know we've got it. And I don't want the last 40 years to go down the tubes at this stage. Yes, sir, Dr. Edmondson.
The 2 things you've said this morning make me realize or remember how important ID in cattle is here in Texas. If it ever rains here again, every slaughter cow that just left an auction ring with a back tag, they're going to be calling that truck driver's cell phone and telling him, don't go to the killer plant. Bring them here, we'll feed them for 2 weeks and turn them out on a note patch, and they'll be bred in 2 months. And so all those cows that go through an auction ring need to be ID'd. If it ever rains here again, we'll be going all over the world trying to find heifers to bring here to turn out. And when we go to Wyoming or Montana or Idaho and buy those heifers and bring them here, we're in the wreck that we had here in the 60s. So we really, really, really have to identify cattle to know where they were. Once upon a time, we've been doing that for 10 years in the sheep industry, tagging every ewe that goes through the sale, and it's not fun. And there's 500 of them on a truck. And you can do it in the cattle business. It's not fun, but it's important.
And I would say, I don't have a scrapey item specifically on here, but, the sheep industry and the goat industry now, the goat folks are having to get more into the identification as we wrap up that. That would appear to be in a successful eradication program. The goal is to eradicate scrapey from the United States by 2017. We haven't had a case here in Texas in about 5 years, and Dr. Schwartz may mention that, but identification is part of that, and I think maybe at some point the sheep industry the rewards will pay off. And so thank you for those comments. Just quickly on border port issues, and Dr. Varner is going to touch on this more than I am. We just continue to work with our partners across the border and stakeholder industry groups in both Texas and Mexico to ensure that import processes are open and effective to catch problems, whether it be TB or fever ticks or any other disease. The numbers are down right now. And it may be a reflection of the last couple of years with the drought. Mexico may have sold about everything they've got. They've been selling spayed heifers now for a while, which eventually will impact their breeding herd ability. And so I know Dr. Varner is going to talk to you more about that. We do have finally at least a temporary way to cross horses back into the United States by land through Mexico, Texas border ports, and that's at Del Rio. May look at Laredo as well at some point if we can get that worked out. And Dr. Varner, proud to have him here, and he'll give you more information on that himself as the USDA vet for Texas. On cattle fever tick, I'm also asked Kevin to give that update. Otherwise, I'll just tell you the numbers have dropped down to about 30 infested premises, which is the lowest they've been in about 6 or 7 years. I think it's a reflection of good management, good work, and also good weather conditions to kill ticks. The drought helped us. And we only have one blanket left, and I think we're going to evaluate releasing part of that last blanket in Starr County in the next few months. And I would hope maybe we can get that whole thing released next year sometime and go back to business as normal. And I'll ask Dr. Varner to give a detailed update on that. But do remember that we have a statutory request for consideration that basically would say any cow or susceptible species in the systematic zone would need an RFID tag, a permanent official radio frequency device where we can scan them, we can use software, we can use spreadsheets, and we can count. I want a tighter inventory on those animals down there in that systematic. There's only 10,000 of them in theory, and I want to know where they're at. I want to know what's on every ranch, how many elk are on that ranch, how many cattle are on that ranch, because there have been some breaks in fever ticks that were people related, not acts of God. Someone left the gate open or they drove off with them. And Dr. Varner and I are committed to watching that a little closer. If it's our people that are the problem, we want to fix it. If their people are the problem, we want to take appropriate action, because fever tick, fever tick is a burden that we will fight forever in Texas. That's the job we can managerially. So the statute says, the rule that's proposed is for you today says that they need to have permanent official identification, and also that they have to pen the cattle once a year so we can see them. And in theory, they're doing that now, but the truth is they're not always doing that now. So that's what the rule that's proposed is in about. Swine health, a couple of things. We did finish a slaughter plant project. Our lab system here in Texas worked with about 4 other labs in 4 other states to look at identification on swine, the pen tags. These are special tags with a barcode in them that identify back to the premise, and we were part of a USDA project, and we did get a few of those tags through Texas slaughter plants, even though most of our commercial guys go to out of state for slaughter. We did pick up some commercial tags at Texas slaughter plants, which in Texas slaughter plants are going to be smaller plants, killing anywhere from 5 to 10 to 50 or so at most. And so these hogs do get out of regular channels from time to time, and we work with the USDA in a project and are proud to be a partner with them on that. And as y'all know, in Texas, we still test all hogs sold here for brucellosis and pseudorabies, and test all hogs at slaughter plants, and we're the only state that does that. And I met earlier last week at the National Pork Board, and Commissioner Real was there, and basically what I was talking to those folks about was, why is that? Why is Texas the only one concerned? Again, it goes back to some designations by USDA that the commercial industry is free of disease, but we know the backyard hog herds are not, whether they're the highest, best quality show person or the slaughter or the food waste feeder out there. They just, in general, are a little higher risk of interaction with feral swine, which are the culprit, because they're just tend to be outside, and the wild boar can jump the fence or whatever. So I'm pushing that message that for the swine folks, that the disease programs have been successful. We're now free of pseudorabies and brucellosis, but it's a paper designation that's really related to just the 5 or 6 or 7 big companies we've got up in the Panhandle. For the rest of the folks in the swine industry in Texas, there's an ongoing threat from feral swine. We need to remain vigilant and spread education on biosecurity for those folks. With that said, we have fallen behind on our ability to evaluate swine herds for risk. That's one of the things our field staff has done. over the years, is every 3 years, talk to folks in the swine industry and just ask them general questions about management practices that could tip us off that they're at risk for having swine disease introduced. With less inspectors, we haven't had the chance to do that. I'm going to try and figure out a way for us to start that back up. We continue to find infected herds, swine herds from time to time for both diseases, and we anticipate that'll be ongoing. So it's my job, our job, to figure out a way to maintain our infrastructure to quickly identify an at-risk situation and go test it to make sure that there's no new diseases for that swine operator. TB, we've started a similar process now, the calf ranch process. As y'all know, this was a rule that y'all passed, which basically just kind of formalized the concept that we're going to begin to work with calf ranch operators in the state of Texas and ask them some general questions. And I think so far the feedback has been pretty good. You know, we weren't sure what kind of reaction we would get from these folks. Some of them, language is a problem for some of these folks, to be quite honest. Some of them don't speak English at all. And so we're working through that. And I forgot to mention that with our public information folks. We're working on creating Spanish language documents and pamphlets for information, not forms, but just Spanish language information for folks that need it the most. And this is a population where we need some information in Spanish about if you're bottle feeding baby dairy calves, here's the situation in Texas, here's the risk, here's the rules, here's who we are. We're going to be coming to see you from time to time, want to get to know you. So we're proud to be doing that. I'm also working specifically with Dave Fly in New Mexico, the state vet, and the federal vets, Paul Shabalgo and Dr. Varner and I have had a number of discussions. You know, Texas has a rule that if roping steers coming into Texas have to be retested 60 days after entry from Mexico, not from other states, but from Mexico. And from any other state, they have to get an entry permit, and they have to have a negative test at all times. So we know they're there because this is an at-risk population, the M-branded Corriente roping steers from Mexico. Well, what we saw was a complete, they fell off our radar completely as far as testing. And the reason I believe is because they're now crossing through Arizona and New Mexico. And then they're coming to Texas, and they're coming on it. They're coming in, and they're not getting the papers, and we don't know they're coming because they're just moving on brand inspections out of New Mexico, or a health certificate that doesn't reflect that they're M-branded animals. And this is, you know, you'll see at the end, this is a possible rule that we're going to take a look at for y'all to consider in the future, which would be that a veterinarian may need to reflect if those are Mexican origin animals, they may need to reflect that on the health certificate. Because when we get a health certificate that just says 50 steers, that's a different entry requirement than 50 Corriente steers from Mexico. And if the vet looked at them, he knows that it's on there, and it's not, but just write one more little sentence, these are Mexican origin. And the roping steers is what I'm interested in more than, I'm not worried about the feeders, to be honest with you. I want to clarify that. But that's something that we may, to be consistent, may just say, hey, whatever they are, write it down if you know that. But basically what I'm telling you is our infrastructure in place to catch TB and roping steers is broken right now because they're outflanking us and coming around through New Mexico. So we're strategizing in New Mexico on how to work this a little better. Have had a number of discussions with the PRCA folks, and Commissioner Morales and I were involved in this dialogue at U.S. Animal Health, and there was a veterinarian there from the PRCA and folks involved with that. That organization is aware of the situation and are reevaluating their options. The truth is those roping steers out of Mexico are just the best quality animals for rodeos because they're stronger, sturdier, their horns are better. They're usually a little older animals, so they're more mature, and they just last longer, and it's a very valuable animal. So they're not completely ready to just say we're not going to use Mexican origin animals anymore. So it's up to us to manage the risk, and that's what I'm trying to do in Texas right now. Dr. Swartz will have more of an update for you on our infected herd. We had an infected herd in San Angelo that's depopulated, but there's literally hundreds and hundreds of traces that have come out of that, both cows and calves, some with ID, some without ID. We're trying to figure out where they went and where they came from, and I'll let Dr. Swartz work on that. But it's literally, we've been working on that for 6 months, trying to figure that out. And again, traceability is an issue there. Chronic wasting disease. There's a whole discussion on this. We're going to have a lot of dialogue later. I want to thank Commissioner Winters right up front. He has done yeoman's duty. I don't know how many times he's come into this office for meetings in the last 6 months, called on the phone. He spent hundreds of hours working on this on behalf of his industry. So I want to thank you for giving us guidance. Dr. Swartz is I asked Dr. Swartz to take the lead for us on working with you on that. But I think we've had 2 face-to-face meetings here, a number of conference calls. Some of the stakeholders may be in the room, and I think they're pretty comfortable and appreciative of the process, but we're trying to be open, and I think they've got a good compromise for you. This chronic wasting disease, and I'm talking compromise on the red deer. Basically, the red deer issue, we had the federal rule that came down, and y'all have taken action on that. We found CWD in far west Texas, and right now that appears, even though we've done surveillance, there's no new cases except some more deer from those same mountains out there east of El Paso. But the third issue was how do we bring the red deer and cyca folks into the fold like the elk folks. It was a complicated process. Business continuity was part of it. We want to make sure we don't put them out of business, but they need to get on the program. And so Dick has worked out a good compromise, and I think that'll be ready for y'all to consider here later on. So I want to thank everybody for that. And Andy will have a little more details on that more in his report. Finally, I'll just finish up. This is a typo. I have it says 7 waivers are requested, but there's only 2. Apologize for that. And you can see there we let 8 research sheep enter a terminal research facility in Irving without genotyping for scrapie, and they're going to kill them as soon as they got finished with them. And then we allowed some antelope from the San Diego Zoo to enter with a brucellosis test that was 50 days old instead of 30, and they were also in a confined. That's a pipeline. They're not coming out of there. They're staying in a high fenced area, and brucellosis in the antelope is not a high risk in my opinion anyway. So I allowed those 2 waivers. The last page I won't even mention. I told y'all about a year ago I'm going to start throwing down ideas for new rules that may be considered in the future, just kind of tweaking your interest. You can see there's some ideas. Pyro reactors having microchips. We're working on that. But Yellowstone, I mentioned the fever tick rules for deer hides from infested premises. We tell them they got to have their hides treated, but we don't have that in rule. So we may want to codify that. Deer TB blood test. This is a big issue for the cervid industry. Is the USDA has announced that they've approved a blood test for TB diagnosis in deer, a standalone test. We didn't bring you the rules to consider for this now because we haven't even been briefed on it yet. We're going to have a conference call next week, and so at the next commission meeting, I'm sure we're going to have to change our rules, acknowledging that there's another test now for TB diagnosis in cervids. There's also a blood test for cattle, and Chairman Morales and I went to a meeting in the U.S. Animal Health on that, and we're waiting for USDA to give us a little more guidance. We may want to take a look at testing that in some high-risk populations, but on the deer test, USDA is going to release it to veterinarians. Say, here's the test. We don't have any rules ready because they haven't told us yet, and I was fairly critical of them that you don't give it to the private vets to at least tell the state vets what's going on. They said, okay, so our conference calls on the 24th and the private vets is on the 31st. I can't get any rules in place before that, but that's the best we're going to do. And we have had a request from a food company, processed food, to want to feed the packaged excess food to hogs by rule. We may need to consider that. We let the prison system cook right now, and there's not, in my opinion, there's not a disease risk here, so we may talk to you at the next meeting about allowing this food company to sell their excess food that's already packaged. I mean, it's processed, ready for human consumption to selected hog folks, and so we're going to talk about that. Obviously the foot and mouth disease risk in meat products led to some changes in 2001. And that's the end of my report, and I'll be glad to answer any questions, and as always, I'm proud to be here. Thank you for your support.
Are there any questions?
Did they find any more CWD in the testing during the hunting season now?
I'm going to let Andy answer. He's going to give you a report, but yes, we did find it's 3 or 4? 3 more deer, all from the same mountain range, all mule deer, all from the same Waco Mountains, nothing outside of that. And we did a significant amount of surveillance, and it's a partnership. Animal Health Commission folks worked with Parks and Wildlife during the mule deer season, and we collected samples at Sanderson and Van Horn and over by Andrews and by the Guadalupe Mountains, where that little town's Cornudas. So anyway, so we're looking, I'm glad we didn't find anywhere else. We reconfirmed that there is CWD in the Waco Mountains, and that's so geographically isolated, we're pretty comfortable that they're not going anywhere for now, but it's our job to make sure there's no man-made movements. I don't think the natural migration is going to happen, but the wild card at the end of the day is New Mexico, what's going on across the state line in New Mexico. And Parks, as you may be aware, their buffer zone is wider than the commission's. Theirs goes all the way up the Panhandle and all the way around to where ours is, because they're worried about New Mexico in general, not just in that one location. They may be right. We just didn't have, we don't have any way, I don't have any staff or any way, we couldn't address that, and so we just let them address it as far as the buffer zone. But obviously, if CWD is found in other parts of the state or other parts of New Mexico, then we will react for appropriate rules for the service that we regulate. And now that y'all passed that rule allowing me to address an area as high risk, just like I'm going to do with Pyro, we won't need rulemaking every time a new location is found. We can address movement restrictions based upon the authority that you granted me to identify at-risk locations. And so for right now, the answer is nothing new other than three more found right there where we already knew it was at. Thank
Do I
you.
have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the actions of the Executive Director for the period from September 19th, 2012 through January the 15th, 2013.
Been moved and seconded that we approve the actions of the Executive Director. Is there any further discussion? None, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Andy, before we get to you, I would like to, I have already in my hand 9 requests for public comment. Oh. And normally, what I try to do is when we get to the rulemaking process, which is further down in the agenda, we present the proposed rule, and then we take public comment. And I have 7 gentlemen here, well, 6, representing the livestock markets that want to talk about the tagging rule, which is not on the agenda. We've already passed it. And I want to offer the courtesy to hear their input right now, rather than waiting to the end of the meeting. We have a couple of other requests, but they're specific to item 12B. So with that, Mr. Domel, is it Domel, D-O-M-E-L? Domel, Mr. Domel, I'm sorry, from Meridian. I'd like to keep these under 5 minutes if possible, because we have a considerable amount of time left on a considerable amount of work left on our agenda. But I just want to offer you the courtesy now, then wait to the end of the meeting.
I appreciate it, and I'm gonna do my best. Excuse me, I wasn't prepared just to jump up like that. 40 years of testing cows for brucellosis, we have finally achieved Class A status. Is this an outstanding success or a dismal failure? While the commission may feel that it was a success, most private businesses would consider it a dismal failure in the amount of money and time it took. In my opinion, the main reason for the dismal performance was the attitude of the commissioner to force their rules on producers and sale barns, and not willing to work with the producers and sale barns to eliminate a reproductive disease. Until your attitude changes, not only in the cattle business, but other things affected by this board, you will do nothing but build resentment and contempt for the board. In the early 1970s, an area inspector come to my father's house. I was in the early 20s. Just giddy. They found the Bangs cow at slaughter, and they traced it back to Norman Domel. He was giddy. They were going to quarantine. Cost them all that money. It turned out to be a 300-pound steer that went to Van Roach. I'm an Angus breeder. I am the president of the Texas Angus Association. 3 or 4 years ago, we come up with some recessive genes, and they were affecting reproduction. We didn't know how bad until we had eliminated those recessive genes. Through the AAA and the cooperation of the members, in 3 or 4 years, we have identified every cow that is a carrier of those recessive genes and eliminated them from production. Through cooperation, we did not fragment the industry. The industry is better off today because they know we've got clean cattle. This is a time for open cooperation and dialogue with producers and operators. Design a program that achieves the goals of traceability without financially harming the industries. The sale barns are willing to work with you on disease traceability on cattle returning to the country while following the federal guidelines on cattle going to follow the facility. Those cows going through the test chute will be ear tagged and corresponded. Those cows going to slaughter, we'd like them to move on a back tag only. All trace backs are come back on a back tag. Those cows going through the sale, purchased to go back to the country, not ear tagged, will be ear tagged either by the buyer of the cow or in cooperation with the sale barn. We are asking you to try this program for 5 years. Advantages are no major expense to the sale barns, little or no expense to producers. We'll eliminate the loss of the value of the cattle from accidents, death, or bruises. L&H will testify about that. Eliminate the needless exposure of our employees from working the cattle. Not all cows are pets, and not all hands know cattle. Create an effort by the sale barns and the Animal Health Commission to work together on a traceability program. The program would be totally in compliance with federal regulation. After 5 years, nearly all the cattle would be ear tagged. And the program would no way infringe on the constitutionally protected rights of free and open trade. Or will this board force their backdoor extortion on the sale barns to get this program done? How many dairy calves have ever been ear tagged? Have been ear tagged and never traced back through that ear tag? The proposed ear tagging program comes from 15 head of cows on one truck. I listened to the tape. At that point in time, asked the sale barn owners, the glue and tags we were getting, you could wipe the numbers off the tags, and I've actually watched calves jump off a trailer and the tags fall on the ground. We actually got better glue now, but we still need to keep track of it. The weak link in the livestock in traceability is not the livestock sale barns. The livestock sale barns, your area vets are your first line of defense. Why do you want to not work with us? This is the time for the Animal Health Commission to work with us. We had a meeting in the sale barns on December 27th, 30-something plus we're there. I've talked to another 30 or 40. Everybody agreed on this program. Let's tag the cows, identify the cows going down the chute. Those cows going anywhere but slaughter. It's the responsibility of the buyer of the sale barn to get those cows ear tags. One last little thing. I know I made some of y'all mad, but I want one quick little story. Cow number 223, we know it very well at Meridian. 223 went through the sale barn in a drought of 2011. 11 months later, they called us and said, 223, this is the FDA, these boys get mad. 223 was suspect for antibiotic residue after 11 months. Okay, I looked her up, took Tanner, well, he's on the phone. I said, you got the wrong cow. Oh no, just threw a walleye fit. I said, okay, but this lady's 80 years old. She has never given a shot in her life. She can't give a shot. She just barely can pen her cattle. That cow went to Nebraska, didn't go to Florida. Well, I gave them the lady's name. A month later, they called back. 223, different week. Oh, now this cow actually went to FPL in Florida. Okay, so I gave him the man's name, telephone number, address, how to get there. A month later, nice lady calls back, 223. Look, I've given you all this. We want to educate this guy. Okay. All in at information. A month later, lady called back again. 223. Said, lady, I've given you this information. I know the cow by heart now. Here's the guy's name, here's the guy's address, here's the guy's telephone number. And then it hit me. I said, lady, why don't you drive to Godley, Texas and look at the Methodist cemetery? You'll find him there. Tag 223. I don't remember this number. 74 RYB 4417. The ear tag was never used in 4 situations. I would like to address one more thing. There's 6 or 7 sale barn owner operators back there. When we talk about stopping a slaughter cow truck to turn them out on grass when it gets good, that's ridiculous. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope I'm pronouncing this right. Mr. Godot?
Kudo.
Godot? Godot. Greg from Navasota.
I appreciate the commission taking time to listen to our comments. I don't have much really to add to what Mr. Dumble said. I'd like to bring up a few points that I'd like you to consider. Me as a sale barn owner, especially, I feel discriminated against. And how I feel discriminated against is if you have a load of cows, you can take that load of cows straight to a packer. And you can kill those cows without any problem, without any tags. But if that producer tries to bring those cows to me, you say we have to tag them, we have to charge that producer. We already have to charge a producer commissions, we already have to charge him. The Cattle Raisers Association just went up on their fees. They have fees, government control, more and more. But the packers, you can go straight to them and give them less control, and you can send the cows straight to there without any more fees. Those cows do not have to be tagged. Those cows at least make it a fair playing field for the sale barns, where if the cows have to go there, go ahead and tag them. The packers don't want to do it any more than we want to do it. But I want to point out that I am for animal control. I'm with you. I understand. And we want what's best for the industry, because if our industry doesn't survive, we do not survive. We do not survive at all. Another point I would like to bring up is the bulls. We already have a trick program. Why do we have to run 1,500, 2,000 pound bull to put a metal clip in his ear? We know where he's going. He's going to slaughter. If the bull's weak and the bulls are thin and they're going to take the back guy and they want to take him to a feedlot, I understand they want to do that. I guarantee you there's not a feedlot in the country, there's not anybody in the country that's not going to take that bull and run him down a chute. Issue the tags on the back side. Don't worry about the bull on the front side, because 90% of those bulls are going to slaughter. They're going to be dead. The workman's comp issues, the extra issues that we already have to put up with and then have to put up with more on top, it's just getting overwhelming. And I mean, I'm disappointed in Texas. I expected it from Washington, but I didn't expect it from Texas.
Thank you. Bill Hughes, from Groesbeck.
Chairman Morales, I respectfully pass my time, please.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Hughes. Mr. Moore, Troy Moore, Stephenville.
I do the same. I'll pass.
Thank you, sir. Billy Schwertner from Morton.
Commissioners, I'm Billy Schwertner from Wharton, Texas, involved in 4 sale barns on the Gulf Coast area. I'm going to agree with Mr. Godot totally. My whole deal about tagging all of the cattle is the abuse to the cattle themselves. Having them go through the chute, then the bruises, the cripples, the downs. We haven't seen this since we quit bleeding cattle for brucellosis. We've had a really, really good couple of years and not having to drag a lot of cattle off. And what I'm afraid of, if we have to go back with all the cattle, and I know that some cattle will be exempt, the cripples and the weaks, and that's going to be an opinion call, but it's the abuse of these cattle that's unnecessary, and the cattle are going straight to the packing house. We know where they're going. I still don't think we need to tag those cattle. We can go with a back tag. Thank you.
Thank you. Tim Von Dublin, is it?
Yes, sir.
Von Dublin, thank you. From Lockhart.
Yes, sir.
Thank y'all for allowing us to come and give you some of our comments. Hopefully you take them and really consider what we're talking about, because as y'all have had numerous meetings over this issue, so have we, from the time when mandatory brucellosis testing was stopped. Mr. Morales, Mr. Jordan, y'all were all at that meeting, and I thought that really went well, and we were able to work through a program as the producer groups, auction barn operators, and the commission, so that went really well. So hopefully, please take these comments that we all make, because we've had numerous meetings as an association, and even though Dr. Ellis said that there's 60 barns in compliance, you know, I'm not going to dispute his numbers. He's got inspectors at each facility. I just personally have been told by at least that many that they weren't going to be in full compliance. They were going to continue with what they were doing. And one of the reasons that I stand up here, I had the same things jotted down that everybody else has stood up here and talked about, but they left one part out. And this is some of the heartburn to us as market operators, not only the unfair discriminatory fact, but I'm just going to read you what I wrote, and it's just so that I can keep on track here, but it's Texas Administrative Code, Chapter 35, brucellosis. As y'all know, the testing section was rewritten as identification. Texas Animal Health Commission has put this rule into effect without any record-keeping requirements. Before adoption, this rule was put out for public comment. LMAT and other producer organizations responded not in favor, and gave suggested comments. One of those comments was the ability to tag on the backside, allow the purchaser, the market could offer a service to the purchaser, or those cattle would leave in essence with the same thing as the trick bull papers as a hold order, and someone followed up on that. So, Dr. Ellis, if you had those cows that were leaving, going to San Angelo Pack, LNH Pack, whatever, and we were getting rain, and we had oat pasture, and those cows were going to be turned out, that wasn't our burden at the market to take care of that. It wasn't the producer's burden to take care of that. Their job is to bring the cattle to us because we get the highest price for them, not to take them straight to a killer where they may not get the highest price for them. They're going to get one person's opinion, not a judged opinion in open market. That was shot down. I don't believe all of y'all ever got the ability to review that, to my understanding. I believe it was shot down before it ever even hit your agenda. So if you would go back and check on that, because we did bring that up. But the idea that animal disease traceability can be accomplished without record-keeping requirements is ludicrous. Or is this the advertisement of no record-keeping just a selling point by Texas Animal Health Commission, because it is known that in Chapter 53, Rule 53.5, market record-keeping of the Texas Agriculture Code, that all Texas auction markets are required to record and maintain all necessary information on all consignments. This information under Rule 53.5 must be made available to Texas Animal Health Commission personnel for inspection. And also, in the question and answers that were put out to the public from the Texas Animal Health Commission, it is printed that the Texas Animal Health Commission requires markets to keep certain records for a minimum of 5 years. If we go back and look at Rule 53.5, there's contradiction, and that rule only requires that these records be kept for a minimum of 2 years. So there is misleading information out there. I wish that y'all as commissioners would come to our auction markets and see how this program is really not happening. We get phone calls on a daily basis, whether it be county agents, producers, anybody that's trying to sell or distribute these tags, sell cattle or distribute these tags. My county agent called me, his superiors gave him 2,000 tags, and he wanted to know if I wanted them. He doesn't even understand the system. I'm going to get tags. the Animal Health Commission is gonna supply me with tags just like they supplied him with tags. No, I didn't want them. Well, he's been distributing those tags to numerous people, and what do? They drive up to the driving lane where we get all of the necessary information, be it name, address, license plate number, all that kind of stuff that we have to get. And he hands me 2 tags and says, would you put these 2 tags in my 2 cows? When I mix his 2 tags with 50 other producers' cows, I can't keep that track. And we're not tagging them right there when they come off the trailer because you have to go through the chute and squeeze chute and to tag those cattle in a safe manner. We won't get into the work comp issues, the injury and death and all that because that's already brought up. Thank you.
Thank you. Bill, do you want to comment when we get to 12B?
It'd be fine right now if I could, sir.
Go ahead. Bill Hyman with ICA.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate being able to talk to commissioners. I appreciate you taking your time to listen to me. We've worked hard as a group, an industry group, working with Dr. Ellis and Chairman Morales. It was a lot of issues were brought up. A lot of things were discussed. Unfortunately, the industry didn't seem to, we didn't feel we were listened to. One of the main reasons is that we kept hearing that USDA, we were just going to be mirroring USDA's rules, that they were going to come out, they were going to require tags. I brought up the fact that, well, here's the proposed rules, and they allow the slaughter cattle to go on a back tag. And I was told, and you were told, if I remember to one of your meetings, that no, USDA is going to come out with rules and everything will be tagged. Well, USDA's come out with the rules, it didn't occur. If you know, most of you, well, all of y'all remember the furor we had over animal ID. The stomping and the cursing that went on, and I don't know how that curse worked or not, but I mean, it was a tough deal. Well, here we are, the producers, for the most part, are ready to tag the cattle going back to the country. The only thing we have heartburn with is tagging the cattle go to slaughter. If we tag the cattle going to slaughter, you know, we suffer the injury, we pay the fee, we have the problems. The TRIC program has worked very well. Dr. Ellis has told y'all that many times. It was done with a minimum of work and a lot of producer input and producer buy-in. You know, when we have a lot of rain, if you'll look at the sale barn records, there's a few cattle that go to slaughter and a lot of cattle that go back to the country. These guys are saying they'll tag those cattle going back to the country. I realize this isn't tagging everything, but a perfect system would be RFID. We all had our premise, but we're not there. Let's give just a little. I mean, just a little, and let those slaughter cattle go on, because it's creating an unfair situation when I can take my cattle in Gonzales and have a truck come and get them to go to L&H, and of course that's a group lot, which is okay. Well, how's L&H going to put my 12 cows in those pens? They're not going to reserve a pen for me, for Bill Hyman. They're going to pick up somebody else's too. They're all going to be thrown in. If we've got any identification problems, it's not at the sale barn, it's not at the ranch, it's at the slaughter plant, because those tags are there. Thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you. Andy? Item 4.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Commissioners. It would be a lot more fun to report on the Aggies' first season in the SEC, but and coach and all, but I won't take up your time doing that, and you may not all be Aggie fans anyway. So I've got a lot of numbers here. I don't want that to hopefully you won't go to sleep doing that, but it's just to try to make an attempt at showing what we're doing with our agency programs, with the staffing that we do have. Tuberculosis, first of all. You've heard me talk about this herd before down in Coke County. It was a herd that was discovered through routine meat inspection. The herd was tested. We found more reactors on the place. gone to slaughter now with federal indemnity. We've tested all the adjacents. You see the numbers there, over 400 head and adjoining pastures. We will circle back and test some of those again to get out, get beyond the incubation period of TB. Dr. Ellis mentioned this to you. There's almost 1,000 animals that left that herd over the last 5 years that went through, primarily through market channels and got scattered around the country. So our job is to try to find as many of those animals as we can, ideally all of them, and get them tested for TB or confirm that they've gone on to slaughter. Some of those were calves, heifers and steer calves, but some were cows as well. But the truth of the matter is we won't ever find them all. In fact, may not find most of them because they weren't, they went through the market without permanent ID on them, and they're just scattered to the wind basically. So hopefully that won't crop up again in another herd somewhere, that tuberculosis, but there's a chance it will. I've talked to you before about the other TB trace in domestic cattle this year, the Lone Star Pack trace, and it was mentioned earlier. We tested 15 herds in Texas, and we're done with the testing now. We had 16 herds on the books, and some of them had sold out, and so we're able to whittle it down to just 15. And there's a number of other brucellosis traces that I haven't talked to you about and mentioned, where we had a slaughter trace back and multiple animals in a consignment that, where we had to test multiple owners to try to get back to that source herd. But anyway, we're done with our part of that Lone Star Pack trace, and Oklahoma's still working on theirs. On brucellosis, as Dr. Ellis mentioned, we are approaching 5 years of freeze status. We've only found one culture positive herd in that 5-year time. We conducted 113 investigations this year. That was where animals were tested at slaughter or at a livestock market or for private sale. We had a non-negative animal suspect reactor, and we traced back and tested the herd of origin, sometimes tested the neighbors as well. Trichomoniasis, just some numbers for you there. There were about 24,000 bulls tested in the calendar year 2012, and just over 433 of those bulls were positive on the PCR test, so that if you do the raw calculation, it's about 1.7%. So when the program was started in 2009, we were looking at 3.5%. So it has dropped. It seems to have dropped some. Fever ticks, you've heard reports on that. Just the news is better this year, and I'll let Dr. Varner give you more information on that. And Dr. Ellis has already mentioned it. I just wanted to put in there FAD investigations, and that stands for Foreign Animal Disease Investigations, and that's when a veterinarian or an owner calls us and said, hey, I've got a cow she's got blisters in her mouth or on her coronary, on her hooves or something like this. It looks like foot and mouth disease to us, or maybe vesicular stomatitis, which is less scary but still scary. So 19 times over the past year we got calls like that and conducted investigations on those cattle. And fortunately, all of them came up to be some other disease other than certainly not foot and mouth disease, and we dodged the bullet on the vesicular stomatitis that they were having in New Mexico and Colorado this year. Moving on to the swine, our personnel collected over 2,700 animals at livestock markets. There is a change of ownership test required, still in place for swine, for brucellosis and pseudorabies, and we drew 2,700 samples ourselves at those markets and followed up on herds when we did find infection. We did 5 pseudorabies herds this year, no swine brucellosis herds this year. It's probably the first in a long time. Foreign animal disease investigations with swine, we had 2 of those conducted. Fortunately, no hog collar or anything bad was found with those. Just to give you an idea of some other monitoring we're doing, some activities to control disease spread. The feral swine holding facilities were 129 of those that are permitted. We do regular inspections on those. Hunting preserves 17, and waste food feeders is 152 around the state. We try to make an effort to, some of those inspections are done by USDA personnel, by Dr. Varner's personnel. In fact, the routine inspections are, Dr. Ellis has our staff go out at least once per year with the inspectors and to do a risk assessment of that herd, and they're tested every other year or every 3rd year, every 2 years. Thank you. Moving on to equine piroplasmosis. Total of just over 13,500 horses were tested last year. If you recall, we don't have an entry requirement. Horses don't have to be tested to come into Texas. but racehorses do have to be tested to go to the track. And there's also a number of other horses tested to move interstate. There's still some states that require us to test. And some of those horses were tested because of disease investigations. So there were 13 positives found in those. A number of those were in Kennedy County for our area test. So this calendar year picked up the last part of that Kennedy County test. And Dr. Ellis has already talked to you about we're considering testing Clayburgh County, about 400 to 500 head. Some states, Oklahoma, for example, has stopped their requirement to test horses going to tracks, and we've had some requests from like the Jockey Association and all that to consider dropping that requirement. So we plan to have an equine industry call within the next couple of months and take some feedback from industry and see if we need any rule change along that regard. The sheep and goat industry, to me, that's a success story. Scrapie is essentially eradicated from this sheep and goat industry. We haven't had a positive flock in Texas since 2008. We did get actually one trace this year from a flock in Indiana. We were able to find that animal through tags that was genetically resistant, so we didn't have a problem there. But there's been great compliance with identification of sheep and goats. In fact, those that are required to be identified, we've got over 95% compliance, coming through markets and going to slaughter, and that makes that traceability easy. When Scrapie's found at slaughter, we can get back to that flock of origin easily through those records. Just to mention, FAD investigations, there were 2 involving sheep and goats this year. So again, nothing earth-shattering was found on those investigations. Moving on to the poultry industry. Yes, Commissioner.
If you'd let me interrupt you, tell me a little about that. You're talking about the trace back on those sheep. Do they have to keep records on those sheep at every transaction? How do they do that?
No, sir. It's basically a bookend approach, if you think about it that way. A Scrapie tag, if they're of the category of an adult animal being sold, but that tag doesn't have to be recorded at the market. It goes through the market. It just has to have a tag. So doesn't have to be read until the animal is at slaughter. And the brainstem tested, so there's a way, sort of a bookend. We know positive animal, we get back to the flock where that animal was tagged, so we don't have to tag them in between or keep records of that transaction. And it's worked really well. So it's not Scrapie, is transmitted usually at birth or soon after. So if you get back to the flock of origin of birth, you almost always have the source. They could have gone through a dealer or a producer in between and gotten exposed there. So we fill in those gaps through the EPI investigation when that happens.
The reason I bring that up, the gentleman from Lockhart a while ago was talking about tagging those cows and have to keep the records. When we started that in the sheep deal, I fought that tooth and nail to not have to keep those records because I understand how hard it is to do that. So if you just can tag them and know where they came from and know where they end up, they've lost very few, less than 2 or 3 per thousand of the sheep that they've tried to test by that bookend approach that you're talking about. And so I don't want to keep records on those cows going through the ring, every tag, just satellite, but thank you.
And it is correct that our rules say that those records are to be kept. I mean, and it's a discretionary thing to not make such an onerous system, especially as we get started, to require that, to enforce that requirement. It is on paper, but it's executive director's discretion and the commission's discretion to enforce it or not. So good point, Commissioner Winters. Edmiston, sorry.
Nice to compliment.
I'm used to
I'm being good today.
You actually have had.
I had a beard 2 weeks ago.
Mr. Winters has spent so much time down here, I just throw that name out. We have had 4 meetings since this summer, 3 of them in this office.
I always appreciate an upgrade.
Didn't know you represented the service industry too, did you? All right, now moving on to the poultry industry. Avian influenza is always of concern to us. We're still monitoring the outbreak that's in Jalisco, Mexico, and they've had a new wave of flocks infected, and so we're on the lookout, especially this time of the year when we are getting a little bit of rain. It's cooler. that virus survives better and would stand a chance to come across the border more. Just to let you know, we're very active in the live bird marketing system. We've done in flea markets and all, we've done over 2,500 inspections at those events. And when we do an inspection, we're looking for sick birds. We're looking for compliance with our rules and all, so we're actively involved. We've collected 4,400 samples in that process. We have over 600 flocks in our fowl registration program, and that program is to be able to fund the owner of the flock when we need to keep records. So that system seems to be working well. Our last species to cover is cervids, and as Dr. Ellis mentioned, it's exciting times in a way for the deer industry, and the fact that there's a standalone TB test, a blood test that's right there at the door, ready to be released. That the TB test for cattle, a blood test he mentioned, won't be a standalone test. That'll be one that we add on to when we test an infected herd. But getting on to CWD, my final topic, as Dr. Ellis has said already, there were 3 major events this year in the CWD world. One is the USDA did pass an interstate rule. We found the second thing was the red deer, a new species, was found to be susceptible. The third thing is we found CWD in Texas. So as Dr. Ellis mentioned, that we now have 5 cases of CWD, all in mule deer, all out in Trans-Pecos and free-ranging deer, close to the border with New Mexico. Going back to the red deer susceptibility, the first herd ever was diagnosed with it in Minnesota. That was a herd that was under a monitoring program, very good monitoring program. It seemed to be, at least on our review of it. We got 93 animals in Texas from that herd, so they were CWD exposed. 30 of those went to one breeder. He still had all 30. We didn't have the option of offering him indemnity. We didn't have the money. USDA didn't have the money. So he was either faced with 5 years of monitoring to get past the incubation period, so 5 years of under quarantine, or he had the option of sending those animals to slaughter, and that's what he chose. Is he sent them to slaughter. Carcasses were held until the test results came back negative, and they were all negative. He didn't have to do that. There's no rule that says you've got to hold that carcass and wait for a CWD test, because there's no human disease known there, but it was just a public perception issue. He did hold them, and they're all tested negative. The other 60 some odd got turned out on shooting operations, and we obviously didn't get a test on those. So today, from the CWD perspective, what you've got in front of you is a proposal to for a rule on the movement of CWD susceptible species. And what that's an attempt to do is to include red deer and sika along with elk in that surveillance, because now we know those species are susceptible. So Dr. Ellis said we work closely with the cervid industry and Mr. Edmiston. No. Mr. Winters.
He's one without the beard.
So he been very instrumental in getting that done. So we think we've got a proposal in front of you that has the support of the industry, and we may hear some comment on that later, but hopefully that we have their support. So that's the proposal, is to add those species to the surveillance program. The adoptions you have in front of you will actually help is an attempt to get our CWD monitored herd program in line with USDA. So that's what's up in front of you for adoption, as well as the allowing you, Dr. Ellis, to declare a CWD movement restriction zone if we need to in a disease outbreak. And then it changes our entry requirements so that now that red deer and sika coming into the state have to have monitored status. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll conclude my report.
If I may, I'd like to make a comment, please. From the cervid side, while we're not a very large industry as far as gross numbers of producers go, certainly not like the cattle industry, it is a very dear industry to those that participate. It was very fortunate this year, and I feel very lucky to have had the ability to work so closely, not just with those that are concerned, i.e. the cervid producers, but with Texas Parks and Wildlife, the Texas Animal Health Commission,
USDA, and every other person that might have had a stake in the game. We've operated not always without contention, but we have operated together with a common goal, and that common goal was to ensure every served within the state of Texas was as carefully protected as possible to ensure that the agricultural commerce in this state is not damaged. A lot of these folks darn sure didn't like what we were being forced to do. Nobody did. But these people, through numerous meetings, and not only Texas Parks and Wildlife, Texas Deer Association, Texas Wildlife Association, Exotic Wildlife Association, veterinarians, practitioners, Texas A&M and their research facilities, all sat down in this room several times and in other places and had very long, hard, difficult decisions to go over. Every one of those people did this willingly. They spent their time, they spent their money to come and try and work with this. And thank goodness we came up with a program. It's not a good program, but it's a whole lot better than what we have. And we will, by continuing to work together, we'll make it a better one. We could not have done any of this without Dr. Ellis, without Dr. Schwartz, Mr. Snelson, Chairman Morales granting them the time that they've had to put into this too, to reach it. Let me tell you something, livestock marketing people and all you cowboys out there that think that we're so bad and we disregard you and don't care about your feelings. That ain't necessarily so from this particular commissioner. I can't speak for the rest. We're trying to work with you guys, just like we work with everybody else, to try and find a program that will be the best for the state of Texas and all of its producers. Not one particular segment, nor one particular group, nor one particular individual. We don't make every decision perfectly correct, and that's why we have comment periods and why we revisit things. I have been involved with the Texas Animal Health Commission for many years prior to becoming a commissioner. I've been through many state veterinarians, many chairmen. The state of Texas has never had a chairman as dedicated as Chairman Morales is to doing the right thing. And we've never had a state veterinarian willing to push the envelope as much as Dr. Ellis does to try and do the right thing for the state in its entirety. Dr. Schwartz, thank you. I know I've kept you here many, many a night when you should have been home with your family. Mr. Snelson, you've missed many of your kids' ball games and stuff trying to deal with me and keep me satisfied here. Mitch Lockwood, you have done a magnificent job in your role as representative of Texas Parks and Wildlife, and because of all of you people, you have set a standard of cooperation that every state agency should try and follow. And it's been an honor to work with you guys. Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, thanks for the time.
Thank you. Commissioner Winters.
I think there was another.
Yeah, I just had one other question, just to ask to clarify on the Lone Star Pack case. What I understood it on the notes here, it had no identification was recorded. I'd understood previously that the identification was recorded possibly incorrectly as far as the back tag tied to the ear tag, and that's why both entities got involved in Oklahoma and in the East Texas.
Right, so there's a lot of, there were some tags that were incorrect. I mean, because there were 920 animals, killed that day, and only 914 were tested for brucellosis. So we know they were off, but this particular animal, no ID was recorded. But we had to look at the consignments. There was a comment made earlier about killing multiple consigners' animals in a mixed lot, and that's what they did in this particular case. Was they had most of them were primarily from one one consigner, but they injected some other animals, I think because they had big horns or whatever, when they could get them worked through the chute. So what we saw in the first sheet is a reflection of the animals from both consigners mixed in. Normally, however the slaughter plant does it, I think it's different at some plants, but they're able to track those animals to that consigner, or they would, that's how you get your money for them. But in this case, there was no ID on this particular animal recorded, and very few, I think only 4 animals on that, out of 20 on that one page of the test chart, only 4 of them had IDs recorded. So there may have been more animals actually identified and just not recorded that day, but we're making a strong effort on that end of the game too, to get those.
That's what I was asking.
FSIs to collect, and that's another federal agency, not the one that Dr. Varner works for, but Dr. Ellis has escalated that all the way to the top, and they are listening, and they're having meetings between veterinary services and FSI's food safety inspection, because the bookend system doesn't work if you don't collect the ID at the end. Good question. Thank you, Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Andy. We're pleased to have Dr. Varner here. Dr. Varner is going to give us a quick update on USDA veterinary services.
Thank you, Chairman Morales, and thank you, Commissioners. Appears that Commissioner Winters went to the Lincoln movie. All these guys have beards. I'm having a beard, right?
Well, it's better than the hog guys.
I'm going to just discuss three points briefly. Ports, cattle fever ticks, and then reorganization of veterinary services. I handed out a handout for everybody, just to kind of follow along. We have 5 land border port crossings with Mexico and Texas. In the last year, we moved the final 2, so in the United States, temporary facilities. And so at this point, at all 5 locations, we're operating in the United States. On the cover sheet, you'll see the numbers this year. This is a cyclical business, right? In the last 3 years, we've seen increase after increase after increase of animals we're importing from Mexico, feeder animals. Those, in the last year, we saw more and more heifers coming in, more and more spayed heifers. The question we've always had every time we talk to the Mexicans is, do you guys have, what's happening to your herd, your availability for animals in the future? And it appears that this year they're kind of hitting the wall on numbers. There's exchange rate issues, there's other issues, but we're basically off 50% over the first 3 months of the year. And when we get into January, the numbers have cratered, okay? I mean, we're talking 200 or 300 head a week at the 5 ports. So we're watching that, but I mean, if you look at ports and importation, I mean, this is just what happens. It's cyclical. We'll have a few years that are high numbers, and then all of a sudden, they have to rebuild their herds, and that's what they do. So we're watching that. Last Thursday, I had a meeting in Laredo with the representatives from the Nuevo Leon Cattle Union and Tamaulipas. And what's happening is, as I said, we've got our 5 facilities in the United States. We told the U.S. cattle industry and the Mexicans that we will inspect in Mexico when it's safe and where it's safe. And so they took us at our word, and they built a multi-million-dollar facility at the Columbia Bridge crossing, which is like 20 miles north of Laredo. And they were supposed to be ready a year ago, and it's taken much longer than that. But we met last Thursday to basically come up with a schedule. What I've discussed and what we've agreed to do is for the first 4 months, we're going to run both facilities on opposite days, even Steven. Okay, we're going to run a day at Laredo, a day at Columbia Bridge, day at Laredo, day at Columbia Bridge for 4 months. We're going to watch cattle numbers. We're going to see what happens. Traditionally, Laredo is not our biggest port. Last year was one of the best years on record, and we crossed 88,000 head. You compare that to 400,000 at Santa Teresa. So what we're doing is for the next 4 months, we're going to look. We're going to watch numbers. We're going to decide, how this is going to work and if we continue to operate at Laredo or not. The Columbia Bridge facility could be a game changer because it's in Mexico. It's a huge facility, 170 acres. They've got 2 dip vats, two inspection chutes. I mean, it's a multi-million-dollar, beautiful facility. Dee and I have been there a number of times. It may be a game changer. 5 years from now, we may see Columbia Bridge and Santa Teresa as the 2 main ports for moving animals. We'll watch. We have a couple final pieces. I've got a safety team going in tomorrow to decide if everything's done at Columbia Bridge. And if they say yes, we plan on starting to operate next week at Columbia Bridge. Day in Laredo, day in Columbia Bridge, day in Laredo. For 4 months. Final word on ports is that Dee mentioned one of the victims of us coming to the United States with these temporary facilities has been the equine industry. And we haven't solved the issue, okay? We cross a lot of horses, and those horses, the equine industry isn't calling us up and complaining to John Clifford that we have a way to cross in Texas. We're concerned that the horses that cross illegally, that they're still doing it. So we're working to build back some capacity. We put a facility, we've got a facility in Del Rio where we actually will cross cattle now, horses. We've encouraged the Columbia Bridge guys to put in an equine facility. And we're also, I was on the phone last night with Bert Healy to add an equine facility. We plan on putting 20 in the next month or 2 months, putting in a 20-stall facility at the same place that we cross cattle in Laredo. Let's move on to cattle fever ticks. Dee mentioned the numbers. Today we have 32 infested pastures, 6 in the free area, 26 in the system in the permanent quarantine zone. On the second page of what I handed out, you'll see this little chart right here in the middle. And I think it's representative of what's happening. That's encouraging. You'll see the red blocks that represents the number of infested pastures in the system in the permanent quarantine zone. Blue is in the number of infested pastures in the free area, and then the total. That's the green column. What you'll see is we peaked in 2009, and we're dropping off each year since. That's the first part. It's a good part of our story. We still see, and we still have issues with increased levels of infestation. We've got problems in deer populations, but overall the trends are good. That's the first part. Numbers are coming down. The second good part is that the infested pastures that we have are either in a systematic zone, or if they're in the free area, they're right across the road. Okay, so they're tight. So what we said we were going to do is we're going to push this tick back to the river, and that's what everything that Dee and I have been doing for the last 3 years. And you see the next page represents that. Is again, with the exception of a couple in Starr County, these free area infestations are right across the road. Two highlights that I want to highlight for everyone on cattle fever ticks are the tubs, the ivermectin tubs. We've been working in a controlled way, but this fall we rolled them out under an authority that FDA granted to the manufacturer called INAD. It's investigational new animal drug. There are fewer strings attached. We've got the ability to move it out and really use this product in the field, in field conditions. And the nice thing about this under INAD, what we do is, on infested pastures, we treat those animals on the front end with Coumadin, standard treatments until we don't find ticks. At the same time, we put out the ivermectin tubs. And the beauty of these tubs is that we don't just treat the infested pastures, we're treating the pastures in the neighborhood, okay, and the neighbors. And so what we've done in this area of Starr County, let's go to the third diagram. This area of Starr County, it's a chronically infested area. We found some new infestations this past year there in the permanent quarantine zone. This fall, we rolled out this ivermectin tub technology across that area in Starr County. We've got, I think, 31 premises where we're feeding animals. We're feeding the cattle, exposing them to the ivermectin tubs. We're looking at what this does, what the impact, how effective it is, what it does for workload. Because under this program, you know, with Kumafos, we're treating every 14 days. With Dectomax, we're treating every 28. With this product, once we get a negative scratch, we're not going back for 60 days. I mean, we ride the pastures, we look, but we're not gathering cattle for 60 days. And so there's a lot of acceptance, the guys like this, okay? Plus they're getting their cattle wormed and, you know, a protein supplement, and it's all good. So so we're watching this carefully, and we're excited about the technology. I'll also mention vaccine. ARS and a major U.S. pharmaceutical company have gotten together, and they're building us a vaccine just for Texas. Dee has been one of the big proponents of this. They're building this for us, okay? Just for Texas, because we're talking 10,000, we're talking 20,000 doses, you know, that's chump change. But they're working with ARS. They started pen trials this fall with this product, vaccinating animals, and they're testing against annulitis. They're about ready to test in pen trials against MicroPlus. This company, their long-term goal is to develop a MicroPlus vaccine, working with ARS, that's an effective MicroPlus vaccine that will be worth billions to them, or millions, because that's what Brazil wants and that's what South America wants, is a MicroPlus vaccine. And that vaccine will also obviously help us when that happens. But this partnership is giving us the opportunity to have a vaccine that we can put in the field, that we can actually use in the field. And our hope is by next fall we'll have that ready. Just a final word on that, our vaccine vision. Dee and my vaccine vision is every captive bovine in the permanent quarantine zone, we scratch those cattle, we've got RFIDs in their ear, we vaccinate every year. And every one of those cattle has a part-time job working for us to kill ticks. You know, it basically, you know, I always talk about making that river wider, making that river deeper, harder to get across. And it gets back to, we want to fight this thing at the river. We do it by having those cattle vaccinated.
Dr. Varner, would the vaccine be able to be used on Mexican steers?
In the permanent quarantine zone? No. I mean, it would be effective, right? But the vaccine kills ticks, and the problem with Mexican animals
Is
is,
the other situation?
yeah, they may be exposed already to that. The final thing is our BS reorganization, just keeping everybody apprised of this. Final 2 pages, this is kind of a graphic of just the organization, but I'll draw your attention to the final map of the United States. Just as a reminder, 4 pillars. This is driven by John Clifford. John is, we're going to reorganize the organization. There are 4 pillars, 2 of which are going to be prominent in Texas. The first of those pillars is called movement and marketability. And under that, what we're going to do is we're going to take the ports and we're going to shift them to that group. Right now they answer to me. They're going to shift it to this other group. We also have a service center in Austin for certificates, for HEB. We do about 30,000 certificates a year for HEB, for anybody shipping animal protein out of Texas. That group goes to a different part of that movement and marketability. The organization that's represented by this map is Surveillance Preparedness and Response, SPR. And that's basically the partner to THC, is Surveillance Preparedness and Response. And the idea is that it's going to be a district-based system, okay? Texas is at the heart of District 4, along with Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. So the vision on the front end of this thing is to have this district-based system, which means like we would have pooled resources on epidemiologists. We would have pooled resources for area emergency coordinators. We might have a pooled field, resource. The issue for us is that we're traditionally a state-based system, okay? Dee and I work together. Our field people, we're a state-based system. And we're gonna try to kind of wedge a district-based system. And so I think there's gonna be some give and take. And what I think this is early in the process. Dee is gonna have a lot of input as we go through this. other state animal health officials. We'll see what we end up. I think there's a vision, but I don't really have a good handle on what we're going to look like 5 years from now. There'll be changes, though, something on, again, on this kind of a system. Any questions?
With the situation with the risk at the border for disease, why would there not be a consideration for a border state region? That way your district manager would be in charge of all the border states and could keep some type of control or good communication. Well, I guess my question is, if it ends up like this, are your duties helping us at the border given to somebody else? Or is there somebody going to be, who do these states turn to for assistance on border control?
I think, Chairman Morales, as far as just the organization, it seems like an odd mix. When you look at this map, right? I mean, am I thinking that's kind of an odd mix? I mean, I always think that, I guess we just haven't had a lot to do with like East Texas. You know, it's been pretty quiet, right? Since we became free and we don't have banks. And it just seems always like Mississippi's a long way from Austin, right? Where New Mexico, Arizona, I think you can make that point. But what I've been told is that there is some there's possible flexibility on how we're going to build this thing. Okay, this is their first. They wanted to keep GYA together in one group, in one district, and they wanted to basically have these. The way they've told me is they wanted to keep the district sizes about the same as far as personnel. The only issue here is that with Texas, we're double everybody else because we have a tick force. Okay, so it's basically they wanted 70 field people in each one of these districts, but then we have 70 plus our 100 on the tick force, and so we're more than double anybody else.
I guess to maybe amend a little bit what I said, I'm not worried about California. They can have their own deal over there, but it seems like Arizona and New Mexico would make sense.
Yeah. Well, I saw this for the first time last week, and I actually have a call at 1 o'clock, and I'll bring your comments to them because it is one of these things where it's an odd mix.
Well, Kevin, I'd go a bit farther and say I think Texas should be its own district and just leave it at that, because this is not, in my opinion, not good for us. The customer service from USDA is going to be extremely weak. But we've had no opportunity to comment on it. Maybe we will later.
Right. You know, tentatively, what they proposed to me is that I would be the District 4 guy. Okay, kind of like an associate regional director. But we don't. You know, we got a long way to go because I want to make sure I want to understand how that was going to function, how we work, how Texas works. Okay, because that's my main focus.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Commissioner Winters, nice work.
Thank you, Doctor.
Dr. Hughes Garza is going to give us a update on the laboratories. Good morning.
Good morning, Chairman Morales. As always, I appreciate the opportunity to update everyone on what our labs have been doing since the last commission meeting. It's been a fairly busy winter for our labs. Our sample volume has been pretty high, and so everybody's keeping busy. We are still working through the growing pains of charging fees for some of our laboratory services, and most recently we've been working with our IT department to try to implement online payment option for veterinarians to pay for their lab services online with a credit card. I think we've got that pretty well lined up to implement when the payment side of that is ready. So we're also getting our web portal online, which will allow veterinarians to log on and view their lab results through a web-based system. We've had 3 employees that have finished a quality management training course that's an online self-paced course. We've got a number of employees that are still in the process of finishing that course, and that was actually not a mandatory course for most of the laboratory employees. We had 3 people that have been to an in-person training on quality management, and we basically just made this online course available to the rest of the employees so that, I think it's helping them understand a little bit better what their role in the quality management system is. And the quality management is something that we had to put in place and really codify as part of the National Animal Health Lab Network when we joined that network. And it's kind of a continual process of looking for problems in our system, looking at any complaints that we get from whether it's our agency staff or practicing veterinarians, or looking at ways that we can constantly improve our system. So really proud of the employees that have finished that, and I've been working my way through the course, and it's a little tedious, so I think it's impressive that we've had some people finish it already, and I know others are working on it. Our laboratory in Austin maintains the ability to do culture for Brucella species, and since the last commission meeting, we did have 3 Brucella isolates that all 3 turned out to be Brucella suis. And then
Holly, were those in cows?
those were all in cattle. And then, like I said, our sample volume for other types of submissions have remained pretty high. We had a little bit of boost to our fee-based brucellosis testing, and then we got approximately 8,000 samples from a dairy in New Mexico that we tested for brucellosis, and some of those samples were also tested for TB. And so that kept the Austin lab busy for some time working through those. And then we've also, on our pseudorabies testing, we had a cooperative agreement with USDA to test a certain number of high-risk samples for pseudorabies. We've completed that testing, submitted everything to them. So I didn't put this on the agenda, but I do want to acknowledge we had a longtime employee, Dorothy Johnson. She had more than 30 years of state service, and she retired this winter, and we're very excited for her to go on to the next chapter in her life. And we had a little party for her and presented her with one of the Texas flags that flew over the Capitol. So she was we definitely miss her, and we haven't actually rehired for the position, and it's definitely a noticeable change with having her around. So, but we're happy for her. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Any questions?
Thank you.
Holly, thank you. Now we'll get our emergency management program update. Amanda Bernhardt is here. Amanda, good morning.
Good morning, Commissioners. I have a brief report this morning. Throughout the fall, the remainder of the fall and the winter, the Emergency Management Department is focused on continuing to prepare the agency and the state for response to any disaster that would affect the livestock industry in Texas, whether that's a foreign animal disease or a natural disaster. And I'm going to take just a minute or two to highlight a few of our many activities. So thank you all very much for having me. We've continued our leadership with the Southern Animal and Agriculture Disaster Response Alliance, which is SADRA for short. It's a multi-state collaboration on disaster planning, and one of the big projects that we just completed with them was a multi-state exercise in which all the states that participated went ahead and practiced a communication protocol that we developed over the summer, and then we discussed and practiced how we would share resources back and forth, and that really made us step back and look at and evaluate what each state has and can share with each other should that be requested through different channels during a disaster. Or something specifically the size of a Hurricane Sandy, which we did this exercise right after Hurricane Sandy, so that kind of added another element of realism to it. We've also begun work on a regional carcass disposal grant project, which explores disposal options during a foreign animal disease outbreak. Available resources, transport parameters, things along those lines. And this is not only just a SADRA project where we're partnering with those other states to discuss some of those things and look at how each other would address that, but it's also a Texas Panhandle project where we're working with some states to the north of us that have a large portion of the feedlot industry in them. So it has some widespread applications of that project. We're participating in the pilot project for a statewide credentialing system, which is supported by the Texas Division of Emergency Management. At the conclusion of this project, it'll improve our response capacity by giving us better access to affected areas during disasters, which this is the first time, again, it's a pilot project, it's the first time for the state of Texas. We continued with our development of the horseback responder team, and in November we had our first training exercise for this team. It was a joint effort between the USDA and it focused our riders and the USDA riders, and it focused on sharpening our response skills, improving communications between those groups, making sure everybody had a level playing field as far as their training and what they knew about response. It was highly successful. It actually garnered additional interest from some of our other field staff that now want to participate and be a part of that team. We have a little brief overview or start of a presentation that our Director of Communications, Bonnie Ramirez, developed for us. She sent it out right after the exercise in the fall, but if anyone needs it or wants to see it, is interested, she has that available for you, and you can contact her to get that. We'll conduct the second half of the training for the remaining portion of the team. We're looking at the first week in April, early this spring, so we'll go ahead and do that, and then from there we'll take all of the after-action items and points for improvement and apply those to our overall agency response and how we can continue to improve our capabilities. As a final item, thank you for your time this morning. We've partnered with the Texas Veterinary Medical Association Disaster Preparedness Committee to develop and provide trainings to local veterinarians, to local VMA associations throughout the state. And this focuses on the role of the veterinarian and local disaster response. Our personnel help develop the training modules, and they'll participate in the delivery of them. These one-day training events are focused on educating the attendees on the state of Texas emergency management system and the actions that a local veterinarian can take in their community to assist in disaster planning, as well as some clinic preparedness type information. So that's one of the key parts of preparing the state of Texas, is that local response. And we recognize that local veterinarians play a key role in preparing that community. And that's the end of my report today. Does anyone have any questions for me? Thank you all very much for your time, and I'm available if you think of something later.
Thank you, Amanda. We'll now move to item 8 and 9. Sammy Chaldy is going to give us a report.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. On item 8, I want to briefly go over the budget and fee revenue status. The first page, which is FY12 fee revenue and FY13 fee revenue information. Just briefly, our revenues are looking good for this fiscal year, for fiscal year 13. We're on track to exceed our estimates by approximately $40,000 to $50,000. We're estimating about $282,000 to be collected. We're looking at roughly about $340,000, $330,000 to be collected. Just FYI, the majority of our fee revenue, about 90%, is coming from our health certificates. About 7 to 8% is from lab fees, and the rest is all other miscellaneous fees. Next point is our budget for fiscal year 2013. Budget is looking good. We're estimating to have a balance of about $500,000 for this fiscal year. We did account for a lower cooperative funding for fiscal year 13. That's already built in. If we get more, then it's even better. So overall, the budget looks good for fiscal year 2013. Are there any questions?
No questions?
Mr. Chairman, I move we approve the administration budget status report as discussed today.
Second. Been moved and seconded that we approve item 8, the administration budget status report. Is there any discussion? If none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
On item 9, basically, for your approval, that are over $10,000. First category is IT, information technology software. It includes our agency's new email system, which was approved by yourself, Chairman and Dr. Ellis. It was $13,500. The rest of the items are basically just routine items, lab lease renewal, lease renewals for our lab in Austin and the Mount Pleasant office. And then one more item is a portable corral that we're buying for $12,500. So basically just routine items, nothing out of the ordinary. And we'd like to request your approval.
Are there any questions on any specific items?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the contracts and purchases request for the period from September 1, 2012 through December 31, 2012.
Second.
Been moved and seconded that we approve purchase request from a period September 1 through December 31, 2012. Any further discussion? None, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Gene, we're going to get started with item 10, agreed orders for violations, commission rules.
Yeah, morning, Commissioners. I bring to you today a series of administrative penalties that I have issued. I issued a number of them over the summer, trying to resolve some problems and issues that were outstanding. As you're aware, they're somewhat time-consuming, so I don't get to do them as often as I'd like. And this represents a number of them that I did get issued and have resolved. I will say I have another one coming up. I'm going to have a hearing on in a couple weeks, so I should be bringing you another one. This first one, this is in regards to, in the matter of Billy Hoover. Mr. Hoover actually is a calf roper, but he likes to rope dairy calves, and so he was a perpetual problem that we were finding that we dealt with over time, but felt like we needed to resolve that and handle it as an administrative penalty. An issued an order he has signed, he's actually paid, and I do believe that this will be resolved. I don't expect Mr. Hoover to have problems not identifying his dairy cows when he returns them to sell them at market. So I bring this one to you. If you have any questions, let me know.
If none, I guess you can move on to the next one.
Okay, next one is regards to Mr. Anthony Parrish. Mr. Parrish is he's a cattle buyer and dealer, does a number of things. This is an issue regarding trichomoniasis and stuff, and the taking of untested bulls and then turning around and selling them and stuff. In this regard, had a load of animals that had been bought, and then we're supposed to go. Typically, he'll send them to an approved facility that we have, and then go off to slaughter. In this case, now they went elsewhere, and then showed up later at the market. So we handled it as an administrative penalty for $1,000. To Mr. Hoover, Mr. Parrish has signed his agreed order and sent it back. Any questions on this one? If not, I'll go to the third one. This third one is Mr. Stephen Smeal. Those that have been here a while, Mr. Smeal, the family, I've had quite a few of these opportunities to visit with you. I will say, Stephen, not so much in his defense, he's a big slaughter buyer in East Texas and goes to a lot of markets, buys a lot of cattle and different animals. And so, as I tell him, he has a frequent opportunity to hit the radar, which he does. And so, this was our most recent regarding variety of issues regarding him taking untested bulls that he will take out of the slaughter channels and he'll turn around and decide to resell it, hoping to improve his margin. And we were trying to take out his profit margin in regards to this. I will say I've had a number of conversations personally with him over the phone, and I will say I think we've gotten to him. I mean, I will say, as I'm well aware, recently he's done a commendable job of having good communication with our market personnel to make sure that he has what he needs, particularly too, as you see in the trick rules, will allow for people to take untested animals and then take them back to market, but they need to permit them. They need to be in communication with our market staff. And that, with Mr. Parrish, were two examples that we were trying to encode upon them the fact that if they're going to do, they need to be communicating with our folks. We need to know, because we have to follow up and trace these things. It's not only time and resources, but frankly, there's a hole in the system, and we're trying to ensure quality control, and these are two efforts made for them. So, Mr. Smeals, we have here, and his is for $3,000. Right, yes, sir.
Let me make sure I understand this. this man is in trouble because he bought animals to go to slaughter with a back tag, and they never did go to slaughter. They showed back up. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, he's a big slaughter buyer, so.
Thank you. That's
It
enough.
happens. Does happen, huh?
It does happen, darn the luck.
Well, they had good ID on them, that's how they found him.
Well, a number of these, that's absolutely, that's, that's exactly, we'll see him show back up where he's taking them and reselling them, so, this was a point of long discussion.
Have we not seen his name before on?
Oh, yes.
Many times.
Yes, it's kind of like Citizen Kane when he died at the end and said Rosebud, and you wonder what that meant. When I die, I'm going to say the Smeals, the Smeals. You know, Mr. Stephen, his father, I mean, this is my all.
Sounded familiar.
Yeah, no, I've got his number down on speed dial. We communicate. But I got to say, I'm going to give him some credit because I am well aware that we've had some great communication at the field level where he's got animals, and he's making sure he's got his permits, that he's getting it attuned to. He's communicating very well. So, you know, he's calling our folks when things show up, or he happens to end up with other family members' cattle that he doesn't want to be associated with. He's good about bringing us that info. So I think, I do feel like redemption is showing up here, or so I'm hoping. I'm optimistic. Like, that we get rain also. So,
You have one question.
I see a note on his signature. I guess that's a payout period or something. What is that?
yes, this is our last long discussion about the fact he did feel like, on principle, he didn't want to go to hearing, which I offered, and as I offered to them all as an opportunity for them to represent their position and stuff. So, you know, basically with his, as we discussed with him, I said, look, you know, the bottom line is you need to take it to hearing. Of course, I think with a lot of them, their ability to pay $3,000 up front, I said, look, I have given them in the past, every one of them I've got their money out of. I said, if you end up having to pay it, you can pay it. He said if he has the money, he'll pay it out in full, but if not, he wanted to do it three-part $1,000 each per month. And I said that would be okay with my money. I've done that, so. I feel like it resolves it, and frankly, it shows us an ability to recognize hardship. So.
There's no more questions out of,
Mr. Chairman, I
like a
move,
motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the agreed orders as discussed today.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Do we approve the agreed orders discussed today? Any further discussion? None, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, carries. Okay, Gene, on to item 11.
All right, now we transition into our rule proposals and stuff. And the first one I bring you has been alluded to by Dr. Ellis, Dr. Swirsky, CWD. This has been a very long and ongoing issue because there's so many things happening in CWD field. You're well aware, and we'll get to a little later, we have an adoption up for a variety of CWD rules that were actually proposed at the last meeting. One of them was regarding what we call our elk surveillance program. It literally was put in place several years ago to try to obtain the surveillance participation of those that have elk herds and stuff. So now with the new and most recent disclosure of red deer, as well as SICA being included into being a CWD susceptible species, we proposed at the last meeting literally a simple inclusion of both red deer and SICA as susceptible species into a testing protocol that frankly required, as they would tell you, to sacrifice an animal in order to move. It was basically for every so many, 1 of 5 for domesticated and 1 out of 10 if you were trapping with free-range animals in order to authorize movement. So this was something that gave quite a bit of consternation to the industry through our various task force meetings that Commissioner Winters has chaired and in discussions with all available parties. There was a desire to refocus that program to go more like a traditional, which is mortality based off of how many animals you have. So, you know, I will tell you that the discussion was a lot more far-ranging and frankly included some elements or issues regarding destination premises where they that there was just not, we didn't have enough statutory authority, and we've had discussions that to be effective, the industry should give us a little more authority regarding this ability. What I brought you today, proposal-wise, is something that was developed with these various constituent groups and associations with the task members with what our statutory authority can do. And it's frankly what it is a 20% testing of mortalities in order to move. It's movement-based, which is where we're strongest in our authority, as well as where it's most focused. One thing I will just go ahead and allude to and let you know, one of the problems with this particular industry, elk, red deer, and cyca, is a lot of these animals are released on large pasture premises and not worked as like traditional livestock. So actually keeping and maintaining an inventory is an issue, it's a question, it's a point of concern. It frankly is something we're still trying to work out, and something that through this proposal, we're seeking comments and input from the affected people and industries to help better identify how to manage that. But basically, the way the program would work is you're either involved in our traditional CWD status program, which we'll get to the adopted rules later. You participate in this program where you're tested 20% of mortalities off of your, how many animals you have. And that will be something that we will have to continue to fine tune and work with, or you send them to slaughter. So that said, it follows a number of the recommendations of the task force group in terms of associating them with a specific premise through a premise identification program. You know, the testing requirements, I will note here, are a little different. The federal lowered theirs to 12 months. This is a point of consternation with a number of the industry members that feel like 12's too young. These are animals that will die for a variety of reasons that have no relation to CWD, and so this is something we went with the 16-month age testing on that, as well as the typical with our other programs that there's a movement reporting so we know what's going on. And as the last thing that we do too on this is because this is something in commerce, you've got guys that are buying and selling their brokers and stuff. We also put in place some dealer requirements, broker requirements to ensure that they're maintaining the proper statuses of these animals and how to keep them, as well as the proper records. So, if you have any questions on that, my expectation is we'll put this out for comment. And my guess is at the next meeting too, we may come back with depending on the comments and some what goes on, a variety of either some modifications, changes, or new things to make sure we get a good program that will help give surveillance for this area of animals.
Okay, before we move forward, we have a request for this specific item. Charlie Seal with Exotic Wildlife Association. Charlie, would you like to speak on this?
Mr. Chairman and members of the commission, I'm here representing the Exotic Wildlife Association. I'm also a working member of the CWD group that we had along with Mr. Winters here. I'm also speaking on behalf of Warren Blunzer, who is a wildlife consultant. It was very difficult, gentlemen, to put something together based on ranching and the need to protect our natural resources out here. That was extremely difficult. The elk, the red deer, and the cyca industry are not like captive whitetail. We can't round these up. We don't have them in pens, and so we've struggled with a number of issues on this. I think what we have come up and what Gene has proposed to this commission, and it will be a continuing work in progress, but we have to get something into place. It's that not only protects the natural resources, but protects commerce and our producers out here as well. And I think we've done that to the best of our ability with this rule, our proposed rule. So I would urge this commission, without delay, to put this into effect, possibly get it out for public comment. There's going to be some tweaking, I think, that has to be done with this, but I think it's for practical purposes, it's something that other agencies across the country, as we've looked at a lot of these different programs, it's a model I think that they could very well follow on some of what we consider to be free-ranging animals and still protect our natural resources out here with the other wild populations. And that's all I have to say, but I would urge the commission to put this into effect. Thank you.
Okay. Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we propose the repeal of and amendments to Chapter 40, Chronic Wasting Disease, located in Title 4 of the Texas Administrative Code as discussed today. I further move that notice of the proposal repeal and amendments of the proposed repeal and amendments be published in the Texas Register with a 30-day comment period.
Second.
Been moved and seconded that we approve item 11A, Chapter 40, chronic wasting disease. Is there any further discussion? Not all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Item B, Chapter 41, Gene?
What I bring to you now, this is Dr. Ellis talked about, and I think Dr. Barner also alluded to. We've been going forward trying to upgrade and revamp some of the FEMA requirements in order to put in place some better management tools. This is one particular that Dr. Ellis has been advocating for a while, as you said, being able to be managed the inventory levels within the actual containment restricted zones in terms of by having them annually present these animals for inspection, as well as that they have a permanent and official identification in it so that we know. Historically, they use a variety of informal identification methods, paint smears and stuff, and so Dr. Ellis is trying to put in place something that will allow for better accountability.
And then, we didn't mention it, but the intention is USDA will provide these tags at no charge. It's no cost to these guys. We're going to give them the tags, we just ask they be put in.
So this is an attempt to bring forth those two ideas. As you might remember from last year, we put in place herd plans and things to better manage these, and this is just the next step. Is we'll follow with hopeful changes to the legislation regarding treatment to bring more treatment options in, and I think make this program more expansive in terms of trying to make sure we're effectively controlling the tick vector and hopefully eradicating it.
And of the herds that are outside the zone right now, would they be treated the same until everything's moved to the other side of the permanent zone?
Yeah,
Aren't there
this
still-
is focused on the actual permanent zone too. You know, the new, whenever they do what they call a blanket and they come in, of course, they're literally effectively engaging with each one of those premises and dealing with it. So they are engaging with those a lot more, going through what they have, inspecting and having them dip them and stuff. This is focused on the permanent.
I would mention too, we had a stakeholder meeting in Mission back in September, and this was discussed at that time with industry representatives and the folks down there, so this is not a surprise. It's just a tool to help us have better oversight of the cattle in that zone, basically not lose them, is what it matters. Could we put RFID tags in cattle in infested premise outside that? Yes, we could.
That's the next one. Okay, do I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we propose the amendments to Chapter 41, fever ticks located in Title 4 of the Texas Administrative Code as discussed today. I further move that notice of the proposed amendment be published in the Texas Register with a 30-day comment period.
Second.
Been moved and seconded that we approve item 11B, Chapter 41, fever ticks. Any further discussion? None, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Item C, swine pseudorabies testing timeframes.
Yeah, this is the last rule proposal I bring to you. It's actually a fairly simple one. What it is for pseudo-rabies testing purposes in accordance with the UMNR and stuff. We have in our rule that you need, once you've removed the last reactor, you need 2 consecutive tests every 60 days to do it. Based on the incubation period and the standards used elsewhere and stuff, a 30-day period with 1 test is evidently sufficient in order to ensure that it's not lingering in the herd, and as such, it's more practical by putting those restrictions on a more manageable time frame of 30 days.
No problem.
Well, it's just a change in understanding the disease, and based over the last 20 years, basically the consensus at the national level of the scientists is that 30-day test is long enough to get the incubation period. You don't need to hold someone 60 days, and that's all we're doing is shortening the time. And we've not ever seen, I don't remember ever seeing a 60-day test come up with the reactor that we did not, we found a 30-day test. So it's just making it easier on the producers under quarantine to be released quicker. Costs us less money too.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we propose amendments to Chapter 55 swine located in Title 4 of the Texas Administrative Code as discussed today. I further move that the notice of the proposed amendments be published in the Texas Register with a 30-day comment period.
Been moved and seconded, and we approve item 11, Chapter 55, swine. Any further discussion? None, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Chapter 35, Gene, you can go through this. I have
Quite several comments.
three more comments.
All right, Commissioners, as you're aware, this is in regards to Chapter 35. It relates to the tagging requirement, which was already passed and in effect by y'all. This literally was an exception that was put forth, a discretionary exception for those cattle that were going through slaughter that were too weak, or for other reasons that the inspector would discretionary-wise waive the ID requirements for them to go to slaughter. So, as you can see from the background, we got 3 comments on the thing we responded to, and a number of comments that were more broad-based, as you heard, regarding the various issues that with the ID requirements for slaughter period. So, broader-based one. So, I bring back to you the adoption of that change and defer to the comments.
Jason Skaggs with Texas Southwestern Cattle Raisers.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, thank y'all. Happy New Year to you. I wanted to, I appreciate the time to make a few comments on this. And we did submit official comment, public comment on this amendment back in November, I guess it was. I just wanted to kind of give you an update from our perspective, and also just still some concerns that, lay out a few concerns that we still have. We've been getting some inquiries on the rule itself. Not only, on the various components and pieces of that, we've been working with Dr. Ellis and his staff to try to get the word out to our members, from articles in our magazine to Facebook to the website to you name it, trying to get the word out. We'll be having a session on this, as Dr. Ellis mentioned, at our convention coming up this March, with USDA as well, to try to educate producers on this. As I've told you before, our policy does indeed support tagging of adult cattle, but with this exception on cattle moving direct to slaughter. And I would just tell you that ever since, I guess for a year and a half now or so, ever since the first point testing requirement went away, we've been having a lot of conversations with Dr. Ellis and other industry associations on what we could do to make sure that there's proper brucellosis surveillance in place, and had conversations with USDA and others on that as well. I think overall there's still a lot of confusion and a lot of questions on this particular rule. A lot of things have been brought up. Who pays? Whose responsibility is it? Slaughter cattle, the record keeping issues, just a lot of questions that are still out there. And I think I would, we do have the USDA rule now that's been published in the record, and will go into effect, as it's been mentioned, in early March. And we participated, I know, with a number of other groups in a very time-consuming but healthy discussion on what we would submit as an industry as far as comments on that national rule. And I think what you've seen now come out, with what we've seen come out, at least on the national rule, is that we worked through a lot of these issues ahead of time, and tried to answer a lot of these questions. And overall, I don't want to speak for the other groups by any means, but overall, I think the industry's pretty satisfied with where the federal rule ended up. And I don't think we ever really fully had that level of I mean, this is no, not our, I'm pointing blame at myself, I'm pointing blame at others. We never had that robust of a discussion going into this rule. We've had the rule final now since June. The question and answer, a lot of the information that we had been trying to get out, no disrespect at all to Dr. Ellis and all the workload he's had. The question and answer documents, a lot of the information from the commission didn't come out until October, November timeframe of this year. With an implementation date of January 1st, you can see where producers have been scrambling, markets, others have been scrambling to try to digest all this in a really short amount of time. And so I think the slaughter rule, or the issue about slaughter, is definitely still significant. We've got a federal rule that says that you can ship cattle, let's just say from Kansas to San Angelo without an ear tag, move on a back tag. If I'm a producer in Victoria, let's just say, and I want to ship cattle from Victoria to San Angelo, I got to have an ear tag. That, in our opinion at least, is an inequity for a Texas producer. That's shipping cattle just within the state. So, and we've had a long discussion about that. We've also had some issues, and I know Commissioner Locke's been talking about this a lot, and may have some questions about this as well, but cattle moving directly from the ranch to slaughter. And Dr. Ellis has answered a lot of questions. If I'm moving cattle directly from my ranch and selling cattle to slaughter at the ranch, that is technically a change of ownership at that moment, and therefore those cattle have to be tagged. If I'm selling cattle on weight and grade to the slaughter facility, then that ownership doesn't occur till those cattle have already been processed or harvested, and therefore then those cattle don't have to be tagged. So, in discussions with Commissioner or with Dr. Ellis, we seem to think we can work all that out, sort of behind the scenes, but the producer's looking for some certainty and some clarity on how to deal with those situations, and I think they're looking for something to point to, and that doesn't currently, line up right now. I would just tell you, and we've mentioned this before, that everybody in this room knows the ongoing drought the last few years. We've seen record numbers of cattle moving to slaughter, and we really, to date, we have no real major disease threat that's occurred during that period of time, and record numbers of cattle moving to slaughter. We think that this, obviously, we hope, assuming a little rain, that those numbers will go down and more breeding cattle will be back, not going to slaughter, and be kept in the country, and therefore those cattle will be tagged, and this peeling off conversation, peeling cattle off and moving back to the country is really, in our opinion, kind of a moot point, assuming we get a little rain. It's because those slaughter numbers are going to be back to normal in a normal year. There'll also be, the producers that we've talked to, at least, those cattle moving back to the country will also be most of them will be tested at the request of that buyer, and at least the ones of the producers we've talked to. So those cattle will be tagged even without a mandatory tagging program in place. Those cattle are going to have a test tag. The testing, I would just also like to point out, has not stopped altogether. I've heard that comment thrown out a lot, not only in discussions we've had, but also, with producers and markets and others. The testing of cattle, brucellosis testing, is still occurring. It may not be mandatory first point testing like we once knew, but testing is still going on, and that is what, in our conversations with USDA and other of our industry partners, really provides that layer of surveillance out there, because there are a good number of cattle that are still being tested that are moving within the state. So, I would suggest to you, we've talked a lot about implementation and sending producers letters now. That was the first I've heard of that. Some sort of a grace period here. It's obviously at the discretion of the commission, obviously at the discretion of Dr. Ellis. But I would just tell you, there's still a lot of confusion out there. How you treat these slaughter cattle at markets versus at the ranch, and all these questions I raised. And I don't know if a grace period of some point, of some amount of time would be appropriate, so that I know a number of the producer groups will be meeting this spring, like us, having our meeting to help get the word out to producers even more. I'd certainly leave that up to the discretion of the commission to consider. Those are just some comments from our standpoint, and definitely, still very committed to working this out and support traceability. But we got to make sure that, the producers understand it, and that it kind of all dovetails in from there. So I'd be glad to try to answer any questions from y'all may have from our perspective.
Jason, would you think a work group or somebody kind of look at this? I mean, I'm getting a lot of comments now. The federal came out, they're totally confused now. Why the feds allow us to use back tags, state does not allow us to back. I mean, it's just like all across the board now.
I know we all participate in a lot of work groups and a lot of subcommittees and all those sorts of things, and I know many of us can get kind of work grouped out. But I do think that the process that we went through at the federal level, and that's just what I'll try to compare this to, was it's really frustrating at times. But I think you see a really good product now, thanks to Dr. Clifford and Dr. Varner and others at the national level within USDA. Many of y'all may have called in on the conference call that Dr. Clifford had to kind of announce the animal disease traceability rule from the feds. And that's one of the first calls, I'll just be honest, that I've been on where all the industry groups are commenting on that call, that they really appreciated the effort that went into that to try to, you know, to work with some of the concerns the industry had. And I won't say that the industry is just jumping up and down excited about that rule as a whole, but it's a whole lot better. And people understand it, I think, in general. And so maybe a work group, maybe if some kind of, you know, to kind of work through some of these issues that are really largely unresolved. And we have a lot of trust and faith in Dr. Ellis, but our guys want to see, they want certainty, and they want to be able to point to something in writing that says this is the way it's going to work. And so, you know, there's kind of a little, there's obviously trust involved there, but I think we're kind of maybe need to see a few more words on paper to try to maybe answer some of those questions in the rule.
Jason, I have a number of clients that are cattle raiser members, and they've called me and asked for tags. They don't have a problem with putting a tag in a cow going to L&H or anything coming off the ranch. They understand what the animal ID requirements are on certain cattle, you know. I haven't heard any opposition.
It's a real mixed bag, and I think when, you know, the calls that we get, once you kind of lay it out there to them and try to answer all the questions, you know, it's some people obviously are upset, some people are saying, okay, I get that, I can live with that. But I still think that the overall and general producer that I talk to, that calls, they've got these all these questions that have been brought up, they go through them. I mean, it's just like a broken record every time I get a phone call. And so I don't know, you know, I think we can certainly continue to try our best to get the word out, and, you know, website, social media, and magazines, and all those sorts of things. But I think at the end of the day, some of the producers are still really looking for something to point to that adds that clarity in black and white.
And also on the sale yard issue, I use a couple of sale yards. I'm in the cattle business. I'm a Texas and Southwestern Cattle Raisers member and have been for over 30 years. But they sent a letter out telling all the producers and all their customers and all their sellers, people that sell there, that, you know, here's what the rules are on the cattle that require an ID. You need to have the cattle tagged before you show up at the sale yard. I don't have a problem with that. I'll tag my cattle.
Right.
And they sent it to all their producers. So, you know, to me, that's a good selling point for them. They're accepting the program. They realize the value of it and the importance of it. And the people that are selling there don't have a problem with it, the ones I've talked to.
Well, I'd certainly defer to the market guys in the room and the expertise on that. I mean, I hear what you're saying, and I agree. I think, you know, it's just a mixed
I commend
bag.
them for that position. You know, I really thought that was a really good letter. I sell a couple hundred head there a year. You know, I don't have a problem with it. And the other people that clients that sell there as well, they don't have a problem with it either.
Yeah.
They're calling me for tags.
You know, we you know, and I didn't mention this, but I mean, we think the amendment before y'all today is, you know, a lot better than what we currently had. So we support the amendment that's on the books that y'all are considering for adoption today. But I think we still have a lot more questions and answers on implementation and how this is all going to work. And this amendment doesn't address the issue of moving those cattle directly from the ranch. And I think even, you know, despite the best efforts of the inspectors out there at the sale barns, I think in our conversations at least, it could potentially slow the speed of commerce down by having to get a judgment or an opinion on a lot of cattle, let's just say, moving through a sale barn, you know, every time they think they might be, you know, questionable or whatever, if they're going to slaughter. I mean, that's going to take some time. And so it's just some things to think about that you're going to continue to hear about.
I've got a comment and a question. We're talking that right now one of the problems is confusion, and perhaps we're not communicating as clearly as we should. Common human problem. I thought I just heard you say that in spite of the tremendous numbers of cattle that have gone to slaughter due to the drought, there's been no disease threat. In my mind, tuberculosis is a pretty serious disease threat. That's comment one, and it has been found. We just were briefed about it.
I'll
we're briefed
clarify
about
that.
it at every commission meeting. you believe that diversion from slaughter to the country is a moot point. Once again, right here again today, we've just fined a man $3,000 for doing that. And if we caught him, we know there's darn sure more than 2 more out there doing it. I don't like regulations any more than anybody else, especially for my species, which you think that Bremer bull's hard to try and tag, try it on a kudu. I don't like it either, but I believe it's incumbent upon every one of us that represent agriculture in any form or fashion to do what is right to protect the state of Texas and its agricultural enterprises. We cannot regulate bad behavior. There's going to be midnight haulers in my business just like there are in yours. Lock on a gate doesn't keep the criminals out, it just makes sure that the good people stay good. I may buy that cow with every intention of having her at Angelo Pack in the morning. And the Fed law says if I buy her, I've got 72 hours for her not to get to Angelo Pack, but to be dead. Be dead. I take her to Angelo Pack, they buy that cow. If they decide, you know, it rained, we've got some wheat pasture over here, we can put another 75 pounds on that cow, she's not going to the kill floor. Well, if she's a banger cow, Dr. Ellis can't track her down if it's a back tag that fell off after that 72-hour period. So this is why I am concerned about tagging every creature that we have as a disease risk to our neighbors. I think it's very important that we maintain and improve the ability of our health care givers and protectors to trace disease threats. That's my feeling on it. Thank you very much.
Well, I want to clarify one thing. When I said, I didn't say there was no disease threat. I said there was no major disease threat. We clearly had a case of TB, but we have not had something that Dr. Ellis and his guys jumped all over that. We know about it. I'm talking about a major disease threat that shut down the industry. That has not occurred in a year and a half time when we didn't have the mandatory first point testing in place. And so, I think that we, as Commissioners, you said, I mean, we support traceability. Our policy supports those cattle that go through or go back out to from a feed yard out to pasture after a certain amount of time to have them tagged. And, really don't have much else to add.
Jason, we've talked about a lot of this, and I really appreciate y'all's involvement, and we are doing what we think is best. We are open and constantly open on timely matters of recommended changes down the road that can be made to improve it. We're constantly changing the trick program. But as we stand today with the past rule and this amendment assuming to be passed, you've talked a little bit about grace period. We want everybody to understand what the reg is. And I think what Dr. Ellis was alluding to was there's going to be some preliminary, when we see violations, there's going to be some preliminary letters go out to try to do, I think, what you're talking about doing. And it is what it is. It's here. We as an agency and we as a commission have confidence in that Dee will do whatever it takes to get the word out and to not, we don't want to be the bad guy here. We do not want to impede commerce. I deal with sale barns every single day. And they're so important to our industry. And their sale barns are kind of a lot like feed yards. We have a big group of cattle at one place at one time, and for a regulator, that's the easiest one to go after. Believe me, I understand. I do a lot of things in my feed yard that I go through a CAFO inspection with me with the state and the federal government, go through an FDA inspection on drug residues. We are producer-driven. We try to be transparent. If we see down the road 6 months from now or a year from now that things can be done better and more efficient, then we're open for timely amendments, not a week before the commission meeting. My phone has rang once from one sale barn operator. And if I'm not mistaken, Jesse or Don, that you have my number. And Ken's door's open. We want to make this work. But today, this is what we have. I appreciate, you brought up some really good points, and it's not the end of it. Some of the things you mentioned, we're going to look at.
Y'all are.
Yes.
We respect the decision and the job that y'all have in front of you, but you're going to continue to hear.
I know.
Lots and lots of questions on
I know.
this. And I, there's like I said, there's way more questions than answers right now. And,
I know.
And that's something that
I
we're
do
gonna be
not
talking about this for a
want,
long time.
I do not want, there was a comment made that I take to heart, and that is an unfair trading advantage, an unfair advantage that's maybe something that would deter a seller to run their livestock through a livestock market. I don't want that. I don't think any of us want that. And if that's a situation that we see, then it's got to be addressed. We don't want that to happen. Please work with us. This is the rule. We'll work the best we can on a transition type period of our enforcement to get everybody to comply.
My only request would be if y'all are going to do something that, is going to be some sort of a transition period or something like that. I mean, right now today, a producer's going to get a letter in the mail, according to Dr. Ellis, that he's in violation or something. That's going to come to a complete shock to a lot of producers out there. So my only ask of you on that would be that make that part of the talking points or something that, they're already trying to get their arms around this rule, and then you start sending them letters in the mail. They're gonna be confused even more. So it needs to be part of the get the information out, in my opinion.
Point taken. Any other questions?
I would hope that letter would be like the one that I received when my son shipped the only dairy animal we owned through the livestock market, and I got a real nice letter from the Animal Health Commission reminding me that there was a tagging requirement and we needed to do that, and I would hope such a nice letter would go out should there be that happen. I would also like to say that when we first considered this rule, I brought an amendment to the floor and to exempt the slaughter cattle from the tagging rule that were going to slaughter. That was ultimately defeated, and what I think was probably the first split vote that I remember there being on this commission since in my 2 terms on the commission. For clarification, what we're considering today is an amendment to that rule that would allow some exemptions from TAHC personnel to that tagging rule for cattle that shouldn't be run through the chute. That's all we're talking about doing today. We're not talking about passing or not passing a rule to tag slaughter cattle. All we're talking about is allowing these exemptions. That's what this proposal is today, correct?
That's correct.
Through a market. I mean, you still got this issue of folks moving cattle from the ranch to slaughter, which you sell it to ranch, you got to have tag, and that doesn't address that issue. This amendment today does not address that issue.
Sure. Understood. Any other questions? Thank you. Judith McGarry with Farm and Ranch Freedom Alliance. Good morning.
My name is Judith McGarry. I'm with the Farm and Ranch Freedom Alliance. It is difficult because we're dealing with a very specific proposed exemption, and we are not against that exemption. So all of my comments are aimed at a somewhat broader question, but it is relevant because of the question of how y'all shaped this exemption. I have never been one to say that the Texas Animal Health Commission should simply follow USDA. That has never been the line I've used. I think this commission needs to use its own judgment. But I'm finding I'm baffled by this situation because the two reasons that we were given for the rule and for not choosing to have a broader exemption that allowed for back tags for all animals going to slaughter, there were two reasons. One was USDA rules coming out. This is what it looks like it's going to be. And the other was the continuing problem of enforcement and how do we deal with people who will break the rule, and this is an easier way to write it for enforcement. The first reason's gone. And I'll say, I'd like to say I took very significant amounts of my life out working on that at the federal level. I serve on the Secretary's Advisory Committee on Animal Health. We spent long hours arguing over the terms of the USDA rule. And the issue of directed slaughter was one of the big issues. And I was very pleased to see USDA listen not only to that, but there was a very clear response to all of our comments, even the ones where they said no, and there were a few issues, particularly on poultry, where we ended up not getting what we wanted at the federal level. But there was a very deep, in-depth, considered discussion on the substance. And unfortunately, what I'm seeing here now is, and I don't mean just this moment, but through this rule, through the proposed exemption, and the probable, what I'm assuming is going to be the adoption of it, is that the reason seems to come down to it's going to be hard to catch the guys who break the rules, and this makes it easier for enforcement. And I understand that issue. I used to be a lawyer. I get that enforcement for an agency is a big deal. But when you are talking about imposing regulations on producers, we need a better reason than, well, those guys make our lives hard, so you're going to have to get stuck with these extra costs. There's no room left for most of our producers to absorb new costs. It's just not there. We can't afford, between the drought and consolidation of the industry, the profit margins aren't there to absorb the costs. And again, there's an odd dynamic with this rule between the sale barns and the private treaty sales, because while I fully agree that the burden should not be placed on the sale barns, and I supported them and I still support them on their concerns about the difference between that and private treaty sales, the flip side ends up being a situation where, guess what, if you're doing a private treaty sale, sometimes it's harder, for our producers, our small producers, people who are not selling a couple of hundred head a year, but who may be selling 10 head a year, 15 head a year. They don't have chutes, they don't have equipment. And one thing that I don't necessarily, I'm looking at your response to our comments that we submitted, I don't think was clear enough in our comments, was an explanation of what goes on with local food sometimes. We often have people taking animals to slaughter because of the lack of slaughterhouses, the few number of slaughterhouses that will take small-scale producers, that will take individual custom orders. Often the only choice for producers to sell meat is to take it to custom slaughter. They don't have a state-inspected facility. They don't have a USDA-inspected facility handy. And the way you handle this, since if you take it to custom slaughter, you can't sell it, is you sell the animal. Or you sell, there are 4 people, they go in, they each buy a quarter of that cow, and they now own that cow, and you transport it to the slaughterhouse for them, and it's under their names. That is very clearly a transfer of ownership. I mean, there's no question, the whole point is the transfer of ownership happened before it ever went to the slaughterhouse. And you're talking again about imposing a requirement that these producers tag these animals, which many of them simply are not in a position to do. So I'd echo the concern. I'm not against this exemption at all. I would echo the concern that you really revisit this issue before starting enforcement, rather than doing enforcement and then going a year from now, oh, we've run into a bunch of problems, let's revisit this. Let's look at a situation where you guys know, let's revisit this section before we start enforcement. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Elizabeth Choate with Government Relations, TVMA. Elizabeth, how are you?
Great, thank you so much. Our members just wanted me to come and offer a few brief words to the commissioners, just in support of the general effort to increase disease traceability among cattle. Our members were incredibly concerned whenever first point testing was stopped, and believes that there's been some positive efforts made in this direction. Frankly, many feel that we've been incredibly lucky so far in this state that we haven't had any major disease outbreaks. And frankly, with so many jobs and much of the economy depending on it, we shouldn't be trusting to luck. So thank you, commissioners, and we're glad that you're continuing to work with the producers on this important issue. And if we can help in any way, please let us know. We're happy to do so.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you. Don Ward with LMAT.
Is it still morning?
It's still morning.
It only feels later to me. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, Dr. Ellis. Thank you for this opportunity and for your service to the livestock industry in Texas. The work of this commission makes it possible for Texas farmers and ranchers to provide safe, wholesome food for not only Texas but the world, and we do appreciate that. Let me just be very clear, LMAT supports the amendment before you today. We think it is an improvement on the rule, it adds flexibility, and is a good amendment. If, as we move forward, we identify other improvements that might be made, please rest assured that we will do our very best to bring them to you in a much more timely manner, and I will apologize for the tardiness the one time that we did bring something, and I certainly understand not wanting to vote on something that you get days before the meeting, so I will apologize for that. That was our main thing, was we wanted to clarify that we do support this amendment. We think it is an improvement in the rule. Be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Don. Appreciate that. Okay, that's all the comment. Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we adopt the amendments to Chapter 35, brucellosis, located in Title IV of the Texas Administrative Code, as discussed today.
Second the motion. Been moved and seconded that we adopt item 12B, Chapter 35, brucellosis. Any further discussion? None, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Motion. Gene?
All right, Commissioners, what I bring to you now is the next one for adoption. This is actually regarding some changes to the trichomoniasis control program. These are things that the advisory group had recommended back in May, right before the previous meeting, and I was unable to get them on this commission agenda. This has been put out for proposal with no comments. And basically was recognizing the use of pooled samples by the laboratory, and we put in a definition for that. It also is allowing for movement of untested animals that are taken, untested bulls, that are brought back to the facility if they choose to want to bring it back to slaughter, as we alluded to. We are having a permit process that provides, that allows for our folks to ensure that we keep them within the system, and we know that it's providing more flexibility to the system. Also, we were amending the fact that we have referenced the BS 127, which is one of our traditional permit options. It's a federal document, but we actually have a state document for this, and so it was making changes to recognize and reflect the fact that it was a permit by us. Also, it was engaged in the concept that had been promoted by the group that if trick was diagnosed in a female cow, that would also implicate the program, which historically it hadn't, but felt like it was important to recognize if trick was diagnosed, that there was follow-up to those herds in order to try to ensure that. And then the last things were regarding the test protocols as followed by TVMDL regarding that, the samples, and making sure that they followed an appropriate time frame. We had referenced in there a 96 hours of collection. Evidently, it can go up to 120, and so the rules reflecting that in order to make it official. And so those are the changes. If you have any questions.
Mr. Chairman, these were recommendations of the working group. Everybody on the working group was very comfortable with this. It would ordinarily have been here at an earlier meeting because I believe our working group met last May. But due to Gene's workload, he was not able to have this ready in this form for that meeting, and that's the reason for the delay. But the working group is in favor of this.
Gene, I've got a question on, it's Rule 38.6. Of course, it's in here, it's talking on number 2, it says the official polymerase chain reaction test is extending the hours that you can get the sample to the lab. in 120 hours.
Yes.
The last sentence here, it says veterinary practitioners may not submit pool samples for an official test.
Yes, they actually pool them at the lab. If you submit 5 individual sample pouches, they can pool them at the lab, which will reduce the test cost, as I understand it. That's the whole thing. But they didn't, the group didn't want to allow the practitioner to pool them because of problems and I think maybe contamination of samples and stuff.
The lab does it, yeah.
And so it was
You can
recognized that the lab.
designate what 5 you want in the sample,
Yeah.
in the pool, but they do it at the lab.
Lab.
But the lab has to.
You send in
be
5
active.
pouches.
Yeah.
And they pull
Yeah.
them.
You can designate what 5 you want pooled together,
Right.
and the lab does it for you. That's the way it works.
And it'll reduce the test cost. Was that the question? Did I answer it?
I think that really is important to clarify that to veterinarians, that you can't pool 5 samples in a pouch.
No, that's right.
Yeah, and I will say the definition.
And that's a
does-
big cost to a veterinarian, those things are pretty expensive, and,
Yeah.
you know, that was one of the things that I think would.
I'm not aware of a lot of problems with that. The diagnostic lab talks to them, we talk to them. I'm not aware that that's happened more than, it only happens once, they never do it again. And this is, we've been allowing this, you know, by non-compliant with anything else since last May. So this is not a new, this is not gonna start, it's already started. I just don't see, I don't think it's an issue. I mean, obviously good communication is important, but.
What happens if
they
you have a positive, you gotta go back and test those 5 bulls. You know,
Right.
the lab does the pooling. You just designate which, like if you send in 100 samples, you wanna put 5 bulls in 5 different,
20.
different pools, 5 bulls each. The lab does that. You just designate what numbers and keep track of it on your paperwork.
Well, they can go back and then aliquot another sample from those pouches at the lab. If you just send in one, then you gotta go put all 5 bulls back in the chute.
Yeah, you gotta go back. If you have one positive out of those 5, you gotta go test them all over again.
Right.
Now, I will add one caveat here to this. You know, this was a request by certain practitioners, some of the folks, and I think Wharton, you know, got Thursday sales. If you're testing bulls after the sale, it's hard for the vet to get the samples in 96 hours if there's a holiday or just stuff happens. This 120 hours or 96, neither one, there's no one knows the real answer. You know, maybe 30 days is good enough. Maybe 2 days is not good enough. There's some studies underway. Auburn University is doing a study right now on this specific issues. How long is the sample still good after you put it in the pouch if you're going to run the PCR? It could be, what I'm saying is it could be in a year or two we may come back and say based on new scientific evidence this needs to be changed. It could be lengthened, it could be shortened. The truth is neither we nor Texas Veterinary Medical Diagnostic Lab staff knows the answer. So we did this to accommodate veterinarians who are trying to test bulls late on a Thursday night or on a Friday and there's a Monday holiday or a Saturday. This is helping practitioners and their clients, the cattle industry, you know, not have a test show up and say, well, too late, you sent it too late, go redo the bull. And so for now, it's good, we think it's fine, but we could come back in a year or two and say we need to reamend this to something else, or longer or shorter.
Lone Star Express, they deliver to the lab on Saturday, so.
The recommendation did come with input from the lab. It was not just an arbitrarily time period. They were represented in the discussions very well, and they were okay with it.
They gave feedback, I think, exactly for that purpose.
Yep.
So, and I will note, Commissioner Evanson, you know, it's one of the things I did put in as a definition of official laboratory pool trichomoniasis test samples, note the fact that you individually collected them, but the lab would actually pool them at your direction. So, and I think that's something important, as you note, for our own public relations wise, to get out that word and continue to educate and promote that position.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we adopt the amendments to Chapter 38, trichomoniasis, located in Title IV of the Texas Administrative Code as discussed today.
Second the motion.
It's been moved and seconded. We approve item 12C, Chapter 38. Is there any further discussion? None, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
All right, Commissioners, the next rule I bring back to you is our Chapter 40, which is our CWD, which was a big daddy. There was a lot of things that were going on in this chapter, and so I'm going to work you through them. As you already noted, I've already withdrawn the ones related to 40.5, which was our health program, and that's going back through the proposals that you just did. That said, as we talked through, as you can see, we got a lot of comments on this. I mean, This is an area where we got a lot of comments, 57 total. And as you'll see too, they were primarily focused on some very specific issues. Just talking through the big picture, what all was proposed here real quick that's still in play is we were modifying our voluntary certification program for CWD and bringing it in line with the federal rule that had come out over this summer. So literally, we were modifying it and making changes to the rule through the definitions, the various general requirements regarding handling, is creating a herd status program that reflected the federal terminology as well as the federal standards. Through all the comments, and they were pretty universal in their disdain and dislike of the fact that the federal rule, when it did several things that they didn't like. One of them was the fact that they moved the test eligible age from 16 to 12 months, which I said industry-wide does have a lot of consternation based on the belief that you're going to test a lot more animals that are susceptible to dying for reasons outside of CWD versus the 16 months. So you are creating a greater hardship on that. The other is the 100% mortality, which is with any herd certification program. You know, that is something that just goes with the quality control and ensuring that something goes in it. But based on this industry and the nature of it too, they felt like it was a hardship and a difficulty. And then the last thing of real consternation and concern was based on the fact that physical inventory is defined by the feds, reflected the fact that they wanted to see these animals every 3 years physically handled with identifications verified, 2 IDs, so that, and the industries all felt like this was a serious hardship in regards to them. You know, as I note in this, what we're trying to do is just get meet the federal standard for those that want to participate and move interstate. So so the rule does reflect that. It does reflect the 12 months testing age because that's what the feds want to see in order to be valid. So, you know, the mortality is based on, that is what the program naturally does, and it's our folks that reconcile, so in dealing with that. The third thing was on the physical inventory, and I will note that we did make a modification there to reflect the fact that that is the agency historically doesn't do a physical inventory for reconciliation purposes. We actually reconcile based on, they'll go out, they'll make a herd count, depending on how large the herd is, reconcile to make sure and use that for that. So that is actually maintained in there that we allow, that we'll do that, where we're not going to actually require the physical inventory unless you want to participate in interstate commerce, in which case we recognize that and we would then validate that for interstate movement purposes. And so those are the things. As such, the rule that was brought back to you regarding the program, the herd certification, was maintained as is in order to meet the federal standard. There was one other comment that was also brought up quite a bit, and it's actually regarding the federal rule. I just make note of it because it's brought up, and that is regarding transit of the state. There was an issue where USDA was trying to prevent our states from impeding or denying interstate movement where you're transiting the state. As you can imagine, in Texas, you might be going through the Panhandle from New Mexico to Oklahoma. And so, as a practical matter, our agency, based on, as we've always handled for interstate commerce, we allow, if you're transiting, got all your proper papers and documentation to show your destination from your origin and all that, we've always allowed that. The issue was brought up regarding white-tailed deer also. We'll note the fact that that is something that was within Parks and Wildlife's realm regarding that. We defer to them regarding whitetail. They are, I will note, their next meeting's next week. They will be doing a rule that will allow for that that transit, provided they meet certain standards with parks. So, and I will note, as I always do, we do have Mitch Lockwood in the house. Should we have any questions? Because I always like to throw him out. He can answer anything. So if you have any questions in that regard, but that was the other issue that was fairly frequently brought up and addressed in there. You know, the other thing that the rule too, just FYI, to go ahead and finish it out, was, as Dr. Ellis noted too, from the previous West Texas episode of Denoting Positives, we've also created, similar to our PIRO ability for him to designate an area of high risk for CWD, so that if we get a positive, come back in another area of the state, he can go forward under authority you've given him to go ahead and set up, designate an area in order to ensure that we have provisions in place to to ensure that we're not infecting or that we're controlling that, to protect the industry and to protect the state resources and stuff. So, and I think that was it. As I noted, the last thing was we pulled down 40.5, and that has reemerged in the proposal that you've already adopted. Do you have any questions?
I have a question for Mitch. Mitch, on those 3 that showed up positive that were harvested, what'd they do with the meat? Did they have to destroy it?
For the record, my name's Mitch Lockwood, the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. The hunters have, all of which have been notified, as well as the landowners, have the option. They are allowed to discard the meat if they'd like to. Right now, all 3 of them are indicating they're not really that concerned, and they said they wanted to give it a little bit more thought. But I did tell them that both our agency and Texas Animal Health Commission would be willing to pick up that meat from them and even incinerate it if they didn't want to consume it, but they certainly could. And of course, I reminded them that there's no known human health risk to CWD, but we do understand that some people simply wouldn't want to consume meat from a deer that's known to have it. But it's completely up to them, Commissioner. And I will also say that we do have several test results that are still pending. The mule deer MLDP season extended through the first Sunday in January. We ran the Van Horn check station through that following Monday evening and then shipped samples to the lab. So I do anticipate within the next 10 days or so, I think we'll have all the results in.
Approximately how many samples were collected in that West Texas area?
For all of our check stations combined, which included some voluntary check stations in Midland, Sanderson, Bakersfield, and Alpine, and then of course the mandatory check stations in Van Horn and Cornelius, we collected just a little over 300 samples. A large percentage of those came from none of the designated CWD zones. People just, we were at a locker plant is where we had some of those set up and they wanted to test their deer. I think of something to note though that we're really encouraged about is we had somewhere around 100. We're still compiling the data, but a little bit over 100 samples from that containment zone.
And that's Hudspeth County and El Paso County?
Yes, sir. So that was more than we anticipated.
And that was mandatory that they be tested out of that zone, right?
Yes, sir.
County had 100.
I got 100 last. Thank you.
Thank you, Mitch.
All right, Commissioners, y'all any questions?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we adopt the amendments of Chapter 40, Chronic Wasting Disease, located in Title 4 of the Texas Administrative Code, as discussed today.
Second.
Been moved and seconded that we approve item 12D, Chapter 40, Chronic Wasting Disease. Any further discussion? None, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Motion carries.
All right, Commissioners, the next one I bring you is looking at Chapter 51, which are entry requirements. This was to do twofold, 2 things. First one was to address the trichomoniasis entry requirements that the group had also had recommended that we make changes. That was to allow the samples be pooled at the laboratory to qualify as antigen tests for entry purposes, as well as it's also to allow that to be good for 60 days versus 30 days. Different movement issues and stuff. This was something that all the various participants in the group felt like it was appropriate and reflected an appropriate standard to allow people to bring in their animals. The other changes were regarding to survey and regarding to the CWD program. It was just recognizing the fact, as we noted earlier, Red Deer and Psycho now qualified as CWD, and therefore, protocol-wise. The other is to reflect the fact that now with the new CWD program, it used to be historically they had this 5-year status if you had already found CWD in 3 years, but that's all changed, so we got rid of the language that relates to those different year standards, as well as to reflect the fact that in order to come in, you needed to be in a program that reflected the federal program is authorized, and so the rules are amended to reflect those changes and articulate those standards incorporated by reference. So, do you have any questions?
No questions? I'd entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we adopt the amendments of Chapter 51 entry requirements located in Title 4 of the Texas Administrative Code as discussed today.
Second.
Been moved and seconded, we approve item 12E, Chapter 51 entry requirements. Any further discussion? None, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
All right, Commissioners, the next one I bring is looking at Chapter 51, which are entry requirements. This was to do twofold, two things. First one was to address the trichomoniasis entry requirements that the group had also had recommended that we make changes. That was to allow that samples be pooled at the laboratory to qualify as an efficient test for entry purposes, as well as it's also to allow that to be good for 60 days versus 30 days. Different movement issues and stuff. This was something that all the various participants in the group felt like it was appropriate and reflected an appropriate standard to allow for people to bring in their animals. The other changes were regarding to survey day and regarding to the CWD program. It was just recognizing the fact, as we noted earlier, Red Deer and Cyca now qualified as CWD, and therefore, from protocol-wise. The other is to reflect the fact that now with the new CWD program, it used to be historically they had this 5-year status if you had already found CWD in 3 years, but that's all changed, so we got rid of the language that relates to those different year standards, as well as reflect the fact that in order to come in, you needed to be in a program that reflected the federal program is authorized, and so the rules are amended to reflect those changes and articulate those standards incorporated by reference. So, do you have any questions?
No questions? I'd entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we adopt the amendments of Chapter 51 entry requirements located in Title 4 of the Texas Administrative Code as discussed today.
Second.
Been moved and seconded, we approve item 12E, Chapter 51 entry requirements. Any further discussion? None, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. I have no more public comment, so move on to set a date for the 386th meeting. And I'm assuming we are looking at spring. I know we have TSCRA, we have to work around, and other things going on in NCBA's in February. What do you think, Dr. Ellis?
It's y'all's call. I stand ready to serve, whatever you want to do. I mean, you got the session that ends June 1st. Is there any value to meeting before the session's over?
Yes.
I would say May would be my recommendation sometime in May. But you can meet early.
Look at, we'll know a lot more as far as our situation by then, obviously. So maybe look at the 7th or the 14th. We can maybe hold the commissioners and work on May 7th or May 14th.
Yes, sir.
Okay? Great. Then with that, I will declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you.